Halo teman-teman, selamat sore. Good evening everyone. Welcome to technical briefing for NUDC 2022. My name is Andre. I will be the one bringing this technical briefing. These briefings will cover all the basic. We'll cover all the basic necessities to understand and how to navigate through the tournament. Just to make sure that this briefing covers everything properly and everyone understands this briefing properly, this briefing will be delivered in Adjudication English, meaning we will be bilingual in this briefing. Some parts of this briefing will be translated into Bahasa, just to make sure everyone fully understands the gist of how Okay, without further ado, for the tournament flow atau alur perlombaan, there will be 6 preliminary rounds where all teams are obliged to participate in all 6 preliminary rounds. All teams and N1s are obliged to participate in the 6 preliminaries with rankings and scores of each preliminary rounds delivered. With the rankings of each preliminary round will be delivered in the oral adjudication except for round 6, which will be a silent round. Jadi setelah debat selesai, akan ada ketua juri yang memberikan penjurian verbal yang akan menyampaikan peringkat dari 1 sampai 4 dan keputusan dan alasan dibalik keputusan tersebut. Nah, sebelumnya, apabila ada pertanyaan, teman-teman yang di Zoom bisa langsung di kolom chat box. Yang teman-teman yang di live stream, teman-teman bisa melalui fitur live chat. Kita juga akan membuka live chatnya. Okay, so result from 6 preliminary rounds will be accumulated to determine teams advancing to elimination rounds. Jadi hasil dari 6 babak penyisian akan diakumulasi untuk menentukan tim yang akan masuk babak eliminasi, termasuk victory points, poin kemenangan, dan team score. In elimination rounds, in NUDC, we will be picking 32 top teams that will be debating in the open octo finals, and 16 novice teams that are not in the top, that have yet breaking, that are not in the top 32. Top N1 judges will also be picked based on feedback scores and will be nominated as breaking judges and will judge elimination rounds. Everyone are required, including debaters and judges, are required to be in the Discord server. We have provided you the QR code for the Discord server. Please enter immediately and rename yourself to gain the full access. We will not be giving for security purposes, just to make sure nobody bombs the Discord server with spams and everything. We are going to only allow debaters and judges that have already rename themselves properly to the full access. Debate platform, we will be debating on Zoom. However, the Zoom link will not be shared until the draw is released. The Zoom link will only be published during every round's draw release time and accessible by clicking the room number where you are allocated on the draw page or on your private URL. Seen below is an illustration on how you can enter Zoom meeting. We hope with this there will be no more questions on Zoom meetingnya mana ya Kak, because we are not going to answer that tomorrow onwards. Halo Ronda. First, every morning we are going to require everyone to check in individually using your private URL. This is done by every member of the team at once every morning during the scheduled check-in time. Check-in time for NUDC is 7 to 8 waktu Indonesia Barat. For KDMI is 7.45 hingga 8.45 waktu Indonesia Barat. We are requiring everyone to check in, not only representation of the team. Everyone who fails to check themselves on time will be dropped from the tab on the day. We are going to be very strict on this measure. We are not going to accept any complaints that raises from you failing to check in. Every start of the round, we are going to release the draw. The draw will be released in the WhatsApp group and Discord. We require you to open the draw page through the link given or through your private URL and take notes of your room and your position where you are allocated that round. So for example, you are allocated in A14 as opening government, then you need to click on A14. And then this is how you are going to read the draw. There will be the heading, it's draw for round 2. It means that the current active round that you are debating on. The tab, the leftmost text is the venue, it's your room number. The positions on the heading is your position, your debating position, whether your team will be OG, OOC, GCO of the round. OG, OOC, GCO stands for opening government, opening opposition, closing government, closing opposition. If you're confused on what that term means, please refer back to pedoman that have been shared earlier this year. For adjudicators, this is how you're going to read what your position is going to be, whether you're going to chair, panel, or you're going to be a trainee on that round. If your name is listed first with a C in the end of your name, it means you are a chair of that round. If your name has no suffix beside your name, it means you are a panel. If there is a T after your name, that means you are a trainee for that round. Hopefully this is clear. Then, once you are in the Zoom meeting, we are going to ask you to rename yourself according to the format that has been given and has been displayed on the Zoom meeting. The format is round, room, round, space room, space position, space name. So for example, in this example shown in your screen, it's round 2 and the team is debating as opening government in room A14. Then we want you to rename yourself into R2 space A14 space OG space Andre Chandra. That's an example that we are given. Hopefully this is clear. If you're sharing a device with your teammates in the same room, please put everyone's name in the Zoom name so we can identify that you are not missing a member, that both teams are using the same device. With that said, 15 minutes after the draw release, the motion will be released in every Zoom building. Case building time is 15 minutes starting from the time the motion is released and will be announced every time the motion is released. Immediately enter and be on standby inside your allocated breakout room. We highly encourage you not to leave Zoom or leave Zoom or like missing during the prep time, so we can actually identify that you are present. Debaters can discuss only with their teammate during case building time. Teams are allowed to prepare in any platforms of their preference. So if you want to WhatsApp call your teammate, feel free to do so. If you want to be present with your teammate in a room during the case building time, feel free to do so. We are not restricting you. We trust your integrity as a debaters. However, we would like to highlight that contacts of any form with parties outside your team are considered serious violation. It's considered cheating and warrant strict measures, i.e. you cannot contact your coach, you cannot contact your teachers, you cannot contact your lecturers, you cannot contact your seniors at all. So during the debate, in this tournament, we highly enforce that a mandatory on-cam policy. On-cam will be mandatory for debaters throughout the debate, especially if you are in a live stream room, i.e. if your room is being live streamed. Before the debate starts, your judge will ask you to submit several information from you, i.e. speaking order and POI preference. This means that please tell us your team's speaking order, who spoke first and who spoke second, and how do you prefer to accept POI? For example, if you prefer through a raise hand feature or through chat box or through unmuting oneself. We also highly encourage everyone and we highly enforce everyone to respect their opponent's POI preference. So deliberations and oral adjudications. After the debate ends, these are the step-by-steps for debaters and judges. For debaters, please exit breakout room. This is not leaving the meeting. This is exiting breakout room. And please wait inside the main room until your judge asks you to return. Then you will listen to the oral adjudication. You will listen on your ranking on that round and the reasoning behind that ranking. You need to submit judge feedback score to your chair who delivers the OA. The judge feedback score is you evaluating and ranking the reasoning that the judge give you when giving you certain ranking. So when the judge said, oh, you got fourth or you got first, then they will tell you, you got first because A, B, C, D, E, or you got fourth because A, B, C, D, E. You will rank that reasoning and whether or not that reasoning is good or not, whether or not this judge is actually judging you fairly or not, whether this judge actually clearly delivers a good reasoning or not. The range is 1 to 10. The breakdowns on what is a 1, what is a 10 will be provided to you in your feedback form. We are highly encouraging to actually submit this immediately after the judge delivers the OA. Hopefully this is clear for the debaters. For judges, we are highly encouraging you to wait inside the breakout room with other judges because you will need to discuss, you will need to deliberate with other judges. Your chair will be the one moderating the discussion. The chair then will submit all ballots, including the debate ballots, the score, the team scores and everything, and also the judge feedback score towards their panels and their trainees. And then one of the judges, it can be the chair, it can be one of the panels, will be the one calling the debaters from the main room to return to the breakout room. You can okay. Then after one of the judges call all the debaters. So for example, hello debater from room A14, please return to your breakout room as the oral adjudication is ready. Everyone will return and then the chair will deliver the oral adjudication. This is judge feedback that we have told you. After listening to the oral adjudication, each team is obliged to submit judge feedback score towards the judge who delivered the oral adjudication through their private URL. This is a common mistake. Ini adalah kesalahan yang kami sering temukan tiap tahun selama NUDC, bahwa debater mengisi feedback untuk semua orang. Seharusnya debater hanya mengisi untuk juri yang memberikan penjurian lisan. Debater should only delivers judge feedback to those who deliver the oral adjudications. Karena secara logis, teman-teman sedang menilai OA yang diberikan. Teman-teman menilai penjurian lisan yang diberikan. Kalau juri yang tidak memberikan OA, secara otomatis tidak bisa dinilai. Sehingga kami selalu mempertanyakan dari mana orang-orang memberikan nilai tersebut. This judge feedback is from each team. This judge feedback is from each team and not each member. Jadi satu orang mewakili untuk satu timnya. Berikan umpan balik hanya untuk juri yang memberikan penjelasan. We cannot stress this enough. Please take notes of the judge who delivers the oral adjudication, siapa namanya, sehingga teman-teman tidak salah saat memberikan judge feedback. If there are spare time between rounds, teams is allowed to contact your judge via Discord.
Kalau gini sekarang masih. Ini kan udah tahu.
If there are spare time between rounds, teams is allowed to contact your judge via Discord to receive the constructives. You can mention your judge in the general text channel. Judges, we highly encourage you to, if you have yet joined Discord, please join now, because we want you to be contactable by the teams. So this is our missing persons policy. This has been shared to you to the technical guide. This is just a summary of it. If your teams are missing, we are going to wait for you for 2 to 3 minutes. If you are still missing or AWOL, absence without leave, we are going to deploy swing teams. Be on standby next round, since you might be allocated for the next round. If one of the speaker is missing or unable to return, or for whatever technical difficulties, unable to deliver a speech, the other attending member will deliver a speech on their behalf. This is commonly called as iron person policy. And this can apply to you if one of your team members unable to deliver a speech. Your team will be scored as it is, and there will be no score deduction. Be on standby for next round, since you will still be debating in the next preliminary rounds. In case of missing panels and trainees, we are going to wait for you 2 to 3 minutes. If you're still missing or AWOL, the debate will proceed without any of those missing panels and trainees. Please be on standby for the next round. You may be still allocated. Teams can miss or iron person at maximum 1 round and still be eligible to break. If your team is missing and or iron persons for more than 1 round, unfortunately, you will be ineligible to break in both open or novice. Teams cannot miss or iron person on elimination round. So if your team suddenly has to iron person during elimination round, unfortunately, we are going to replace you. We may be breaking the reserve breaks, for example. So there will be no observers for NUDC or KDMI. Only registered participants in NUDC or KDMI can watch the debate. Our tap team reserves the right to kick any unidentifiable accounts out of Zoom meetings. So, for example, if you forgot to rename yourself, or we are unable to identify who you are, unfortunately, we are able to kick you out from the meeting. If we happen to actually catch you doing identity theft, i.e., you are impersonating a participant of NUDC or KDMI in the Zoom meeting using their profile picture or using their names as your display name, we can track you, we can catch you, and we will take strict measures. So this is just a summary on how ballot and feedback work. Untuk judge feedback score will be delivered by teams to the chairs to the panels and trainees. Panels will not have to submit any judge feedback scores. For debate ballots, teams will not be submitting any ballots. Chairs will submit 2 ballots, Typicat and Google form, before delivering OA. Panel or trainee will not have to submit anything. Hopefully this is clear. So there are several frequently asked questions. So, for example, you are a team and you give the wrong feedback score to your judge because you are supposed to give them a 10, you type in 1, for example. You can resubmit your judge feedback for that particular judge. Resubmitting feedback score will override your previously given score towards the particular judge for that particular round. So just resubmit it. It can happen, but please be responsible as well. So we are novice teams, but you're breaking open. Can you choose to break in novice? No. And NUDC does not allow teams to choose their break rounds. It will be based on priority. If you break open, you break open. So that's it. If we are going to start addressing any questions that arise. Untuk proses penjurian N1, ada pertanyaan dari Kak Alpino di live chat. Untuk proses penjurian N1, apakah wajib menggunakan bahasa Inggris atau boleh bahasa Indonesia? Ini adalah keputusan policy yang dibuat oleh chair masing-masing ruangan. However, we highly encourage everyone to use full English throughout the tournament. This includes throughout the discussions and deliberation processes. Kapan pemberitahuan untuk mendaftar kategori novice, Kak? In 7 minutes. Di 7 menit setelah ini akan ada briefing dari novice officer. They will tell you the novice criteria, the process on applying as novice speakers, and all the details. Where do we submit the ranks that is given by the judge? Through your private URL. There will be a feedback form, and that's literally called submit feedback. That's how you do it. Okay. Pardon me, I would like to ask a question about the proposal of speaking order. I did. Okay. I would like to ask a question about the proposal of speaking order. So basically, as a team, before the debate starts, we will highly encourage you to literally type in on the chat box. Kita minta teman-teman ngetik seperti ini. Jadi timnya misalin OG, the first speaker for that round is Samuel Loren, POI is through chat, second speaker is Andre Chandra, POI is unmute. Hi Kak, can I take a screenshot and slide and novice and open breaking? Boleh, feel free to do so. Breaking announcement will be public, it will be live streamed for general public. Feel free to do so. We are going to share the slide afterwards as well. Izin bertanya Kak, untuk memberitahu kita akan dapat ronde berapa itu gimana ya? Semua orang, seperti yang kita udah bilang, semua orang akan mengikuti 6 ronde penyisihan. Jadi nggak ada yang kayak BINUS hanya di ronde 1, ITB di ronde 2, UI di ronde 3, semua akan mengikuti 6 ronde. Izin bertanya Kak, untuk pendaftaran kategori novice bagaimana? Sudah dijelaskan, dalam 5 menit akan ada novice officer yang akan menjelaskan. Do we have to join the chamber link on the hari cup as soon as the draw release, or we have to wait until motion release before joining the round chamber? Yes, you should have to join as soon as possible. Bagaimana kita tahu akan tampil di ronde berapa? Semua akan tampil di 6 ronde. Apakah ada pertanyaan lagi? Kita masih punya 5 menit sebelum aku serahkan ke Anisha untuk novice briefings. Kalau semisal tidak masuk ke breaking, apakah hari Kamis kami tetap hadir? Teman-teman dipersilahkan untuk tetap hadir dan menonton debat yang berlangsung. Tapi teman-teman tetap memiliki kewajiban untuk hadir. Untuk launching mosi, apakah akan di-launching pada saat memasuki breakout room atau sebelum breakout room? Oke. Sebelum masuk breakout room, jadi breakout room akan dibuka setelah mosi diluncurkan. Jadi prosesnya draw release, teman-teman rename, nanti mosi akan diluncurkan di dalam Zoom, di main room, lalu setelah mosi dirilis, biasanya kita akan announce-nya, the motion has been released, the time right now is 2:57 waktu Indonesia Barat, the debate will start. at 3:12 waktu Indonesia Barat, your breakout room will be open. Itu adalah saat breakout room dibuka. Lalu untuk Mosi akan di-launch di mana ya, Kak? Nah, kita akan launch di semua platform, di Zoom akan kita announce, di WhatsApp akan kita bagikan, di Discord juga akan kita bagikan. Oke, kalau tidak ada pertanyaan lagi, terima kasih teman-teman. Oh, maaf tadi sempat kelewat untuk renaming ordernya bagaimana ya? Format nama akan terus kami tampilkan selama draw release, tapi formatnya adalah round room position. Okay, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your attention. We hope this clears. If there are any further questions left unaddressed, feel free to ask in the group. Signing off. We wish for the best for everyone participating in NUDC tomorrow. Hope for the best. We cannot stress this much that we are proud of all of you that have made it to the nationals. We believe that you will show us the best out of your performances. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm giving it to Anisha untuk Novice briefing. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Okay, thank you, Kak Andre. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen first. Oh, sorry. Okay. Is my screen visible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Novice category briefing for NUDC 2022. I am Anisha as one of the Novice officers, and along with me there is Kak Mayrel. Now we are going to explain about the Novice category. So first, what is the Novice category? The purpose of having a Novice category is to recognize, appreciate, and celebrate the participation and efforts of speakers and teams who have just started debating. As much as debating is a competitive activity, we need to remember that one of the main purposes of the activity is to proliferate critical thinking in Indonesia. The Novice category in NUDC, especially in NUDC 2022, has its own elimination round, grand final round, and also speaker award. So here is the Novice criteria. Number 1, a speaker has never advanced to the open category elimination rounds of any varsity level, national, or international competitions. Number 2, a speaker has never been awarded a speaking award in any varsity level, national, or international competitions. Number 3, a speaker has never been a champion or best speaker of a Novice category in any varsity level or national tournaments. Number 4, a Novice team must have both speakers qualify as Novice speakers. And number 5, you can still apply for a Novice speaker even if your teammate is not eligible as Novice speaker for individual speaker award. So please still apply even if your teammate is not eligible for the Novice category. Now, explaining the national debating competition. For the definition, number 1, it should have at least 1/3 of the participants coming from different provinces from where the tournament is hosted. Number 2, there is no barrier to participation, including but not limited to geographical area, age, batch, major or faculty, i.e. IHL, Novice UI, EdgeFed, CJDC, SOVET, etc. Please note that number one, a national debating competition can be either varsity level or open competition. For example, JOVET, IVET, ALSA UI, ALSA UNPAD, NUDC, FT, GO, EP, ATMA Open, BIPO Open, HBP, USU Open, etc. Secondly, high school debating competition does not count unless the speaker was the representative for WSDC Indonesia. And here is the timeline. So for the application, you can start to apply right after this briefing. We will drop the link for the novice application form. And for the deadline, it would be tomorrow on September 12, 2022 at 5 waktu Indonesia Barat. And the link would be bit.ly/novice application NUDC 2022. Please make sure that you put the uppercase correctly, because if it's not, if you don't, then it will not work. And then we will share the temporary status on September 13, 2022 at 8 WIB, and it will be announced before round 3. After that, you can appeal if you are rejected, only if you are rejected, and then we are going to conduct the interview on September 13, 2022, and it will be conducted between round 3 and also round 4. And again, you can appeal, but only when you are rejected. And finally, we are going to announce the final result on September 14, 2022 at 8 WIB before round 5. And please note that our decision after announcing the final result would be final and it cannot be changed. Now I'm giving it to Kak Mai.
Check, just to make sure they are visible and audible.
Yes, exactly.
All right, cool. Okay, so I'm Mai. I will be one of your novice officer. I would like to share some important notes as well as FAQ, or frequently asked questions, or pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang seringkali dipertanyakan. Yang pertama, do I register as a speaker or as a team? Please remember that the novice application is an individual application, which means that even if both you and your teammate is a novice speaker, then both of you needs to register individually. So you need to register as a speaker, your teammate has to register by their own. That's why the Educator team, as well as the novice officer, would highly encourage all of the novice speaker to directly apply as soon as possible, so that, yeah, you will not forget it, or like your teammate might be missing the application and so on. So yeah, don't forget to remind each other if your teammate is also a novice speaker. But again, I would like to encourage you to still apply, even if your teammate is not a novice speaker, because you will still be eligible for the individual novice speaker achievements. All right, next. The first FAQ, or frequently asked question: what if my team make it to the open break? First of all, I would like to confirm that it is a very possible scenarios of a novice team breaking into the open category. When that happens, there are several consequences. Number one, your team will not be eligible for the novice bracket, which means if you are a novice team, but you are proceeding in the open break, it means you're going to continue your rounds in the open bracket as well, which means you will join the open quarterfinal, open semifinal, and you cannot join the novice semifinal, novice grand final, and so on. Second of all, please remember that your team cannot withdraw from the open bracket, which means if you are a novice team and you are proceeding to the open break, please remember that you cannot withdraw for whatever reasons. You will have to still continue debating to the next round. Please note that NUDC is one of the most, if not the most, prestigious British parliamentary English debating in Indonesia. The government is watching, the Educator putting so much effort in this competition, and there are people that are, training for years for the sake of joining this competition. So we highly encourage you that if you are a novice team and then somehow breaking into the open rounds, please don't be discouraged, and please see it rather as an achievement, because it means that you are giving your best performance. And yeah, please just continue to proceed to the next round in the open break. Third of all, but don't worry, even if you are not eligible for the novice bracket, you will still be eligible for novice category speaking award. We also see this happen like almost every years. We see novice speakers proceeding in open breaks, but still getting the overall best speaker in the novice category, for example, or getting into the top 10 best speaker in the novice category. So worry not, even if you probably not breaking into the novice bracket, but you are still eligible to actually getting the novice category speaking awards. All right, next. Okay, frequently asked question number 2. If I have advanced to a novice competition and to a novice competition, am I still eligible? Well, if you advance in a novice competition, then yes, you are. However, if you end up winning the novice category in that competition and or snatching the novice best speaker award, then you are not. Then you're no longer eligible. Excuse me for a moment. All right. Sorry for the sorry for a moment. If you are breaking in a novice competition, then you will still be able to actually qualify as if you're breaking in a novice competition, you will still be qualified to apply for novice status. However, if you become the champion or snatching the best speaker award, then you are no longer eligible. So if you are, for example, a runner-up in a novice competition and or made it to the top 10 novice speakers, for example, you become the 7th best speaker or like the 6th best speaker, then you can still apply as long as you are not the champion and not the overall best speaker. Next. All right. What about semi-restricted tourneys? For example, pro-arms competition. Are they still considered as a national tournament? Well, for the context, pro-arms competition is a competition that usually required a team to be consisted of either pro and arms or arms and arms. Pro is basically an experienced debaters, and arms is basically a novice debater, a high school students, or any other definition of arms by the respective tournaments. So, for example, of this competition is the BINUS Pro Arms, like one of the most famous Pro Arms competition in Indonesia. So, if you are breaking in this kind of competition, or even let alone being the champion of BINUS Pro Arms, for example, then unfortunately you are no longer qualified as novice speaker for NUDC 2022. Because regardless if you are an arms but paired with a pro or with another arms, the competition as a whole is substantially considered as an open tournament. That's why you would have been exposed to debating with the pros. So unless you can prove that in that particular pro-arms competitions, no pro actually participated and all participants were arms pairing, it means that you're still no longer considered as a novice in case you are breaking or, for example, becoming the champion of that particular competition. All right, next. How does an appeal process works? So what is an appeal process to begin with, right? So appeal process is, for example, the moment when you are actually, when you are actually, for example, the temporary novice status has been published in the public, and then you see that your application is being rejected. If you believe that the novice officer have made a mistake in rejecting your novice status application, then please feel free to reach out either to me or to Anisha on the Discord. And then after that, feel free to tell us why do you think we are wrong, and please provide evidence or like witness to support your case. But please remember to do this during the temporary novice status announcement, because you have plenty of time to actually make an appeal and so on. So please do, if you wanted to make an appeal, then number one, please do that after the temporary novice status is being released. And please don't forget to actually provide evidence or witness to support your case. Next. Okay, this is the last question. If I believe speakers that have been granted novice status, but they are really not, can I make a report? Which means that, for example, if you see the temporary novice status is being published, and then you see certain names, for example, you see Icha is being published, but you know that Icha is the former champion of XXX competition. You may report Icha to the novice officer, for example. So yes, the answer is yes, you can report someone that you think or you know that this particular person is no longer is no longer a novice speaker, but you can only do so once the temporary list is being published, and you cannot report after the final list is published. So once again, please remember to make an appeal and make a report during the during the temporary list, when the moment when the temporary list is being published. Second of all, when you are actually wanted to report, please reach out to us through Discord and make report. And again, please don't forget to provide solid and sufficient evidence to support your report. So we wouldn't like believe in any baseless claim. If you would like to report someone, then please provide also an evidence to explain why do you think this particular person is no longer eligible as a novice speaker, and so on and so on. So that, I think that is all of my of our novice brief. Kind reminder, there are certain issues with the G forms. Thank you for the report. We currently trying to fix that issue. So we will fix the G form link, and then when the problem is fixed, we will send the link for you to apply to novice category later on. We will spread the link through the chat group, WhatsApp group, as well as the Discord. So yeah, we are very sorry for the inconvenience, and please wait for a moment while the novice officer are fixing the G forms. So I think that is, but in the meantime, we would like to accept any questions in case any of you still have certain issues. Do you guys have any questions regarding the novice category or like novice application? All right, is there any question regarding the novice applications? Maybe we can proceed to the next slides. There is my Discord display name as well as Isha display name. Oke, Ahmad Fauzan, berarti kedua speaker dalam satu tim harus mendaftar dalam novice kategori ya, Kak? Ya, betul sekali. Jadi, karena ini pendaftarannya bersifat individual, nanti setelah G-form-nya kami perbaiki, akan kami share kembali. Ketika karena pada G-form itu teman-teman sudah daftar secara individual, maka dari itu kalau teman-teman ingin diconsider atau ingin dilihat sebagai satu novice team, maka baik pembicara pertama maupun pembicara kedua atau kedua orang dalam tim tersebut, keduanya harus mendaftar secara individual dalam novice kategori tersebut. Jadi misalkan saudara Ahmad Fauzan mendaftar sendiri, tapi partner dari saudara Ahmad Fauzan tidak mendaftar, maka bisa saja tim saudara Ahmad Fauzan tidak dilihat sebagai novice speaker karena tidak dilihat sebagai novice team karena yang kami lihat hanya ada satu pembicara yang eligible sebagai novice speaker, seperti itu. Apakah sudah jelas? Baik, sama-sama. Apakah ada pertanyaan lanjutan? Oke, ada pertanyaan lagi dari Taufan Sutijo. Kak, maaf agak telat bertanya, mau nanya perihal open tadi, apakah Educator dan University Debaters dihitung sebagai tim atau terpisah? Mungkin ini saya asumsikan untuk mendaftar novice tim maksudnya ya, apakah misalkan kalau N1-nya itu sudah bukan novice, tapi sebenarnya debaters-nya itu masih novice, maka itu akan dihitung secara terpisah. Jadi walaupun N1 dari teman-teman mungkin sudah bukan novice debaters, akan tetapi jika kedua orang pada satu tim itu sama-sama masih novice debater dan keduanya sudah mendaftar novice application, maka keduanya akan tetap dikonsider sebagai novice team seperti itu. Sehingga tidak apa-apa kalau misalkan N1-nya itu sudah bukan speaker, itu tidak akan dilihat, akan tetapi yang akan dilihat adalah kedua peserta dari tim tersebut. Debaters-nya yang akan dilihat adalah debaters-nya saja, seperti itu. Apakah sudah jelas ataukah ada pertanyaan lanjutan? Oke, sama-sama. Ada pertanyaan dari Firmansyah dari YouTube. Question, where can we get the link for novice speaker? We are currently fixing the novice speaker link. We are very sorry, there are certain issues with the link, but after this, we're going to share it in the WhatsApp group as well as on the Discord. So yeah, after this brief, we will directly share it to you. So please, we are very sorry for the inconvenience. Okay, another questions from the Zoom, from Britney Lumentut. If the two speaker register for novice speaker, does it mean that the team is automatically a novice team, or does the team need to register as a novice team again? If both of the speaker already register for novice speaker, it means that the team is automatically being considered as a novice team. So you don't need to register again to receive the novice team status. But please make sure that both of you and your teammate already applied for the novice speaker for the novice status application, and you need to make sure that both of you are really eligible. So in case that both of you are already applied, but if one of you is being rejected from the novice status, then you are not going to be eligible for the novice. You are not going to be eligible to be considered as a novice team. But if both of you is already registered and both of your application is being accepted, then you are going to directly receive the novice team status. So you don't have to apply for anything else. Is that clear? Thank you. Okay. Pertanyaan lain, baik, dari Joshua Enzo di YouTube. Kak, izin bertanya, kalau jadi N1 tahun lalu, apakah masih bisa mendaftar novice? N1 tidak menjadi parameter untuk mendaftar novice, tetapi nanti yang akan kami lihat adalah track record teman-teman dalam mengikuti kompetisi. Jadi apabila teman-teman misalkan N1 dari tahun lalu, akan tetapi teman-teman ternyata belum pernah mengikuti kompetisi lain dan kemudian belum pernah breaking open, mungkin teman-teman menjadi novice speaker, akan tapi jika teman-teman ternyata selain menjadi N1 di tahun lalu juga sudah pernah misalkan menjadi champion di novice competition atau mungkin menjadi champion di open competition bahkan, maka teman-teman tidak lagi eligible untuk menjadi novice speaker. Maka dari itu nanti jika linknya sudah dibagikan, teman-teman silahkan untuk memasukkan saja data selengkap-lengkapnya mengenai kompetisi-kompetisi apa saja yang teman-teman ikuti. Nanti dari situlah kami akan mencoba untuk mengconsider seperti itu. Baik, selanjutnya dari Zoom ada dari Aiman Zaidan. Izin Kak, berarti singkatnya kalau kita merasa penuh syarat sebagai novice, maka silakan daftar ke form novice, dan jika ternyata lolos ke babak penyisihan, maka otomatis batal untuk bergabung sebagai novice. Mungkin ini maksudnya jika itu ya, jika misalkan maaf, mungkin ini maksudnya adalah jika teman-teman sudah mendaftar ke form novice, tapi ternyata kemudian lolos ke babak penyisihan yang open kategori gitu ya mungkin ya. Jika itu terjadi, maka teman-teman akan otomatis masuk ke babak penyisihan yang open, akan tetapi teman-teman masih bisa memperoleh penghargaan individual. Jadi semisalkan teman-teman tim novice sebenarnya hanya saja kemudian lolos ke open break dan kemudian masuk ke semifinal atau bahkan mungkin lolos ke grand final, teman-teman akan berdebat di semifinal dan grand final untuk open kategori. Akan tetapi itu tidak menutup kemungkinan bahwa teman-teman masih bisa memperoleh penghargaan novice speaker kategori. Misalkan teman-teman masuk ke grand final open NUDC, akan tetapi teman-teman masih bisa misalnya menjadi best speaker of novice kategori, atau misalkan novice speaker itu juga bisa. Jadi seperti itu ya teman-teman. Apakah sudah jelas untuk saudara Aiman Zaidan? Dan clear enough. Oke, terima kasih. Selanjutnya untuk Putri, apakah seluruh debater wajib mendaftar sebagai novice atau tidak? Jawabannya adalah tidak. Debater yang sebaiknya mendaftar novice kategori adalah debaters yang memang merasa masih novice. Jadi teman-teman sudah tadi seperti yang sudah dijelaskan oleh Anisha, jika teman-teman sudah pernah menjadi champion dari novice competition, atau teman-teman sudah pernah menjadi breaking di open competition seperti itu, atau cara-cara lainnya yang menjadikan teman-teman sudah tidak eligible sebagai novice speaker, maka teman-teman tidak wajib dan bahkan tidak boleh ya mendaftar ke novice kategori seperti itu. Ya, apakah sudah clear? Oke, selanjutnya. Untuk Balkis Kazama Kinari, izin bertanya Kak, untuk N1 apakah ada kategori novice juga atau sudah diperhitungkan pada saat accreditation test? Untuk teman-teman N1 tidak ada kategori novice ya, jadi kalau untuk N1 itu secara singkatnya atau secara sederhananya nanti semuanya itu akan dihitung sama rata seperti itu. Jadi tidak ada breaking novice N1 seperti itu, kemudian breaking open N1, sebenarnya tidak. Kalau untuk N1 sistemnya satu untuk semua, jadi tidak ada novice kategori ataupun open kategori seperti itu. Ya, jadi semuanya hanya berdasarkan pada accreditation test saja, tidak ada novice atau open gitu, tidak ada. Kalau untuk N1 ya, atau untuk N1 Educator seperti itu. Ada pertanyaan lagi teman-teman? Sebelum mungkin nanti akan saya kembalikan ke moderator, atau mungkin teman-teman yang di YouTube juga bisa bertanya, nanti akan saya baca juga melalui live chat. Oke, baik, ada pertanyaan lagi. Oh, oke, sudah. Dipersilakan, masih ada sedikit waktu bagi teman-teman yang bertanya mengenai novice kategori atau novice application. Apabila teman-teman misalkan nantinya kemudian menemukan pertanyaan baru, feel free to reach out dari saya ataupun partner saya Anisha melalui Discord seperti itu. Jadi saya hitung dari 3, 2, 1, jika sudah tidak ada pertanyaan akan saya kembalikan ke moderator. Pertanyaan untuk novice application saya tutup dalam 3, 2, 1. Oke, saya asumsikan tidak ada pertanyaan lagi. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much everyone for your time and attention, and good luck for the competition. For H4 or yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Right, cool. Hi, everyone. First and foremost, just want to say hi. The Edge Core, all of them. Can you hear me? Yep. The Edge Core, all of them are here and we're on cam. So we just firstly want to say hi. I'm Ruby, and there's Omar, there's Leah, Judah over here, and all of us are going to say hi as well in our respective sections for the briefings that were going to happen after this. So we're going to do 3 briefings very quickly after this. Have somebody unmuted. Just make sure you're muted. Yeah. Rihanna, thank you so much. All right. We're going to do a debate briefing and then a judge briefing and then some discussions about the judge test exactly in that order. So without further ado, I'd like to invite, I believe Leah will be presenting first for debate briefing. Yeah. Go ahead and take it off. Yeah.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Is my screen visible and am I audible?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, Judah, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So it's nice to meet you all. We'll start with the debaters briefing first. So I think we can go on to the next slide. So I guess there's just 3 things that I want to note as to what. Oh, okay. Can you not hear me? I'm clearly heard, right? I just want to check with everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
audible.
Awesome. Great. So for starters, why is the seminar important? You might have done a lot of debating. You might have done not so much debating. There are just three things that I think are important to note. First is just that this is important for critical thinking. In debating, you're just required to think pretty critically, talk about global issues. This is just one way for you to know what scope of structure you should use within this specific format. Secondly, is structure. In debating, you're required to convey your thoughts very concise manner. It's only in 7 minutes, so you want to make sure that you're using that time to the best of your abilities. And third reason why the seminar is important is because of evolving standards. So even if you've done a lot of debating, standards continue to change in the world stage and also the, amongst Asian institutions, for example. So this is just important to get a refresher on these things. So next slide. So very quickly, what's the CAP? We're going to keep saying CAP cap throughout the tournament. We, the four of us, are the chief adjudication panel or the AdJcore. We made the motions. We invited these wonderful judges to judge you throughout the tournament. And if at any point throughout the tournament you have questions for us, you can ask any of us. Everyone, all four of us here, and also all the judges here are very, very qualified to be judging you. You can ask Opi, who's an NUDC champion, Omar, who's an AVP and UADC DCA. Leah is a champion of 3 big tournaments, or the biggest tournaments in Indonesia, Asa UI, Jofed, and IFED, or myself. So you can ask any of us or approach any of us throughout the tournament. We're more than happy to chat with you about anything. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about 4 things: human speaker roles, motion types and setting up, the debate, best practices, pitfalls, and also technicalities and feedback. Let's go into the first section, team and speaker roles. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of the format and the team and speaker roles, as you all know, there are 4 teams in BP debating: opening government, which consists of PM and DPM, the opening opposition, which consists of leader of op and deputy leader of op, closing government, which consists of member of gov and government whip, and closing op, which consists of member of op and opposition whip. Sorry for the background noise, by the way. Hopefully you all can still hear me very clearly. And also you have the adjudicators who are judging you throughout the tournament. So that's the format. Next slide, please. So a couple things about BP debating. First, every speech is 7 minutes long. There's no such thing as a half speech as you would have in a 3v3 tournament. Every speech is 7 minutes. 2, points of information can be given between the 1st and 6th minute. I would also really, really encourage every debater to give POIs and also to accept POIs. Failure to do so can result in lower speaker scores and all other stuff that we're going to go through later. But I just want to flag this out as being something really important to do. We've seen a trend of speakers just never accepting POIs in their speech. It's not a good thing. 3, all motions in this tournament will be impromptu. Thirdly, it's decided mostly on logic, not speech beauty or English precision. So even if you have grammatical errors here and there, stutter here and there, that's totally fine. The main point is that you have strong logic that backs up your speech. Next slide, please. So how do you win a debate? There are 3 different ways. One is through fulfilling your logical burdens, elaborating your arguments based on likelihood, and also impacting out your claims. I think if you want to go deep dive, we have examples here. I won't go through all of it in the interest of time, but essentially just ask yourself, why is your argument true? How do you supplement them with enough elaboration? Maybe give examples for it. What's the impact of these claims? Who does it impact in particular? How large is that impact, etc. Second way to win a debate is to make it is through the motion, or it being motion based. So essentially, you have to address the key issues that are demanded by the motion. So you have to ask yourself, did you tackle key areas demanded by the motion? And notably, you have to do this alongside the first thing and also alongside the third thing. But essentially, the point here is you really have to read the motion clearly to understand what does it demand of you. And third thing to think about is the meta debate. So it's not enough just to bring a nice case to the debate. You have to bring a nice case that works for that specific debate. So actively compare yourself with other teams in the round. Frame your arguments to be important or more important than other teams in terms of their case. Just make sure that you're actively comparing against other teams, because otherwise you're not really winning a debate. You're just giving a pretty nice sounding speech. Yeah, that's not what debating is. Make sure to fulfill these 3 burdens. Next slide. Okay, we know how to win now, but how do you lose a debate? You lose a debate by being irrelevant to the motion, underdeveloping your ideas, not coming up with responses, or unable to reverse responses from other speakers. For example, if you're the DLO, and then the DPM gives a response to your LO, if you don't respond back to that, they're probably going to win against you. The fourth is also being unable to prove why your team is better than other teams. And also in close calls, this is why I said this was really important, not taking a POI can also make you lose a round against the team. On that basis. So do these if you do these 5 things, you will lose. Just make sure that you don't do them. Okay, we'll go on now to the team roles. What do opening teams have to do? You start off with the most important issues of the debate. You explain them as solidly as possible. You don't need a dictionary definition in most cases. And this is sort of just the case of if there is a term that might be ambiguous in debate, you might maybe give an explanation for what it is. But in most, if not all cases, you don't really need a dictionary definition for most things in the motion. If you're opening government, model it out. How to run your policy helps, but it's not mandatory. And if you're OHO, you have to select your stance. Either is status quo or status quo with an improvement, or a completely new counterfactual, so like a counter model. But you do have to explain what this counter model looks like and why it is mutually exclusive to the thing that the opening government brings. And also, the final thing here is also to take a POI from closing. This is just strategic for you to do so that you can rebut them even before they talk. So that's what opening has to do. Next slide, please. We're now going to talk about closing teams. What do you have to do? You need to have an extension. And I just want to note as well on this that sometimes a rebuttal can act as an extension. So you can like make an extension out of a rebuttal. There's no like hard and fast rule on like what can be an extension or what cannot. But an extension essentially just has to be new. And if you want to win, it has to be stronger than what your opening brings. You have to explain why it's stronger than what your opening brings. As whip speakers, for example, you should summarize the debate and give sort of like a biased adjudication for 7 minutes in favor of your closing team, not the whole bench. So you're not trying to prove that the gov team should win or the op team should win. You're trying to prove that the closing gov or the closing op should win. Like I said before, it can be new arguments, new responses, examples, new ways of saying things. I do want to caveat here that just saying the same exact thing as your opening doesn't win you the debate, or just saying what your opening said in fancier language doesn't win you debate. But if you frame what your opening say to be more impactful or more important, that can be an extension. So remember, the more meaningful a contribution is, the likelier the closing team is to win. Fill the gap as well of explanations from your opening, but don't repeat what they said. Just repeat. Just explain what they haven't said and why it's important that they had to have said that, and also take a POI from your opening so that they can actively engage with your extension. Next slide. Okay, I'll go through these very, very quickly. So in terms of speaker roles for PM or LO, essentially give a stance, as I've already talked about before, and give a couple arguments, and that's essentially what your role is. Next slide. For deputies, 2 things. First is to strengthen your team. You can give an additional argument or give additional explanations to support your teammates' arguments, or provide and also provide key responses against the other top half team. Next slide. For member speakers, what you have to do is you have to provide an extension, and you can also provide key responses if you have enough time. This is like sometimes you can't give like 5 different responses, but you can maybe give 1 or 2 just to sort of really explain how to situate your extension in the debate. Okay, and now on to the, I think this is the final speaker role. Yeah, so the final speaker role slide is the whip. 3 things. One is to summarize the debate, bias to your side, obviously, strengthen your team, your teammates' extension, and also to provide key responses. I think it's really, really important for whips to provide responses much more than their member, because their member is often doing a lot in terms of giving an extension. So those are the 4 speaker roles in a BP debate. Now we're going to talk a little bit about motion types and setting up the debate. Next slide, please. Yeah. So motion types, analysis motions versus policy motions. What is an analysis motion, or often also called value judgment motion? This is the simplest type of motion. It basically just asks you the value of a certain item. Is it more positive or is it more negative? So net beneficial or net harmful. Usually there's no feasibility argument here, though this might occur in the case of like this house believes that X actor should do X thing, for example, that is a quasi value judgment motion. But in general, analysis motions just ask you the positive or negative value of a certain item. So an example here is, this house supports breaking apart tech giants. You are not doing the action in and of itself. You are just asking the question, does breaking apart tech giants bring more good than harm or more harm than good? Okay, so this is categorically different from a policy motion, which I'm going to talk about now, which is when you advocate for a specific action and you have to talk about how that action is going to play out. So in the motion, this house would ban modern mini marts. The actor here is the parliament or congress of a specific country, and therefore this motion is usually like not about values or harms or benefits, instead specifically about action. Yeah. Next slide. There are also different types of motions that talk about an alternate universe. For example, a regrets motion looks back into the past. So you evaluate these kinds of motions in retrospect. So it's like, we live in the world today. What do you look at? What has the impact been of this specific thing? So for example, this house regrets the rise of NATO after the fall of the USSR. With the benefit of hindsight today, do you regret it or not? And also there are prefers motions. This house this house prefers a world motions usually, and essentially what's an important distinction here is that opposition cannot invent a new world to compare the world to, but they must defend the status quo. Yeah. So if you say something like this house prefers a world in which love is altering, you cannot present an entirely new world that the motion doesn't allow you to fiat. You have to present a world that is the one that we're living in today. So fiat essentially means assume. So you cannot present a world that you just assume out of the blue. So yeah, those are the 4 types of motions, and I'll hand it over to Leah to explain. Oh, actually, I'll just do this final thing first, the actor motion, and then I'll hand over. So actor motion, essentially, it's any of the previous four types, but you add in an actor to it. So as X actor, this house believes that blah, 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 or this house as actor would do blah, blah, blah. So every argument that you make has to be anchored to the specific interest of that actor instead of just a general argument about why it's good or bad. Yeah, so that's how it differs from the previous 4 types of motions. Handing it over now.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm Leah. So we're going to talk briefly about definition. Like what Yuda has mentioned, definition is not a dictionary definition, so you don't have to tell us like houses are building made of bricks and stuff. You have to tell us like what does the motion holistically mean. Debates are not assumed to happen in Indonesia or in any specific time or place unless the motion said so. So please do not make the debate more specific than what's indicated by the motion. And lastly, a definition can be challenged if and only if OG definition is truistic. Like we would, like as in the example, we would invade country X only when the invasion is perfectly done, or if it's quarrels like a creative interpretation, such as defining UMR with the right to get married, or if it is a very unfair setting of time and place, like this debate is only about Vanuatu and no other places, like what have been mentioned in the previous point, like do not make the debate more specific than what is stated in the motion. And only LO can challenge the definition, and it will get very messy. Avoid this at all costs. Please set up a reasonable definition. Fiat. So what is fiat? It's not a car. Fiat means that the motion is assumed to pass. There should not be any argument about, oh, this cannot happen because it's not going to garner enough support. We don't have the money for this. The debate should assess the value of the action when it is done. And counter props, I think Judah has explained this briefly. Opposition team can propose a counter policy in order to achieve the same outcomes as government team. Counter policy must be mutually exclusive. Yeah, I think Judah has touched on this. So we'll just go to the last point. A valid counterprop use the same amount of fiat, political will, resources, money as government's proposal. So we're going to talk about the benchmark, the best practices, and the pitfalls to avoid. Best practices on argument. So it is worth noting that in BP, principles have the same or equal weight as pragmatic arguments. A well-developed argument usually has these three following traits. First, there is a clear premise isolated from other ideas. You can see the example in the slide. Second, reason or factor to support the idea. Example help, but it is not a must. Lastly, comparison. Like as in the example, military conscription does all the above more effectively than blah, 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 which is the comparison. Oh, yeah. Lastly, link back to show why then the argument matters. Like what Judah has explained, you need to convince the judges why not only that your argument brings benefit, but why then it matters and it's important. Best practices on responses. We're going to talk about the type of responses. First, negation, which can lead to flipping, structurally proof, and not just denying why their claims are false. In fact, the intended consequences is the opposite. Examples are stated in the slide. Second, mitigation, which proves why your opponent impact are not as great as they claim. Judah has touched on this briefly too, like you need to compare actively against other teams. And lastly, trading trading off or even F proves why even in your opponent best case, you're being super charitable to their case, then your case or what you want to present in the debate is more meaningful than whatever they want to bring in the debate. Second, on the quality of elaboration, all the best practices for argument in the previous slide applies here. Lastly, be direct, identify which premise of your opponent you'd like to tackle, then break it apart. Points. So there in BP, there is no difference between arguments and responses. It has the same value. You may experience that some arguments are directly oppositional to what is said by your opponent, bearing the dual function as both your argument and your response, and this is very common. There is absolutely no need to separate arguments and responses. You may integrate them whenever you feel like it's more strategic to do so. In fact, doing so can save you more time. But when you do this, please allocate time in the beginning of the speech to address things that you cannot integrate in your argument. Second, flag where your argument is responsive during your explanation. So you can add like after explaining your argument, this also means that their point talking about the efficacy cannot stand because blah, blah, blah. Best practice on POIs. So yeah, please offer and take POIs. Engagement, ideally 3 across 2 speeches. You must accept at least 1 per speaker. If you're an opening take at least one from closing and vice versa for cross-bench engagement. The consequence of not taking BOI, like what we have repeated before, is that it might flip the call on closed debate, lowering your speaker score, reducing MOV. Ideal POI, so there's a limit to POI, maximum 15 seconds. The shorter, the better. They will have less time to think about the answer, so this is strategic. And only one idea. If it has more than one, the judge will pretend that the second part didn't happen. Also remember, just 15 seconds. And lastly, never waste your time by saying, you said that, blah, blah, blah. Just ask your question right on. Yeah, write it down. You wouldn't want to like waste 15 seconds. If opening, ask question that forces closing team to talk about your case. And if you're in the closing, don't spoil your case to the opening, because they might be able to steal that. And not answering a POI will count as not taking one. So these are the common mistakes. First, again, not taking a POI or not answering them. Second, using dictionary definition. The judges are average reasonable person, so you can just go straight into like what the motion means. Third, separating rebuttals with arguments, making yourself repetitive. That's wasting time arguing the wrong motion. Yeah, please be more careful when you read the motion, making the motion more specific than intended, not differentiating yourself with an opening theme. So yeah, you need to flex your new contribution. And finally, forcing yourself to speak for 7 minutes and if I'm only repeating yourself, please, you don't need to do this. You wouldn't get extra point just by reaching 7 minutes. We see the content. The content is like the most important part of your speech. Yeah, one thing we would like to develop in NUDC is a list of debating pros glossary. So like stance, it means your team's core vision, which determines what set of action would be relevant for you. Second, framing. Framing is active effort to strategically position your argument or themes in a way that is beneficial to you, explaining why your contribution matters more in the debate. Counterfactual. You'll probably gonna hear that a lot during the tournament. Counterfactual essentially means the opposite of your policy. For example, if you would like to apply a new policy, the counterfactual is status quo. Status quo is the current condition. Delta is the difference, usually in the extent. For example, the policy implementation will be very problematic so that the benefit is very small, leading to a low delta to status quo. Lastly, metric. Metric is a yardstick, a benchmark in which to gauge changes, threshold of success, and etc. Section 4, we're going to talk about technicalities and feedback. So general conduct, please be polite. I know we're all competing here, but general decency should still apply. All equity rules apply. Please do not harass other people. Do not curse. Do not generalize or address protected attributes. Apologize swiftly and sincerely if you do. Remember that you are representing your university and this is an event by Pusprasna. While it is virtual, the usual level of decorum and appropriateness is still expected and demanded. Wear your alma mater jacket. If not possible, wear something presentable and decent. Lastly, Pusprasnas has the authority to record any room they want. And debating in Zoom, use your own timer. One of the apps that is frequently used by debaters are Debatekeeper. Respect the POI preference of the speaker. I think it has been mentioned by the top team that before the debate starts, the debater needs to introduce and tell other people in the chamber what their preferred POI method. Some people like to hear it through unmuting and others through chat. So please respect and note down what your opponent prefers. Prepare a backup connection. If you know your internet is like super laggy at the stuttering or other backup connection, be prepared to call your friend over WA or any landline for emergencies. double, triple check your audio devices. You can do this before you do your speech, like ask the judges if they can hear you. If possible, please turn on your video while speaking and mute yourself when you are not speaking. Do not disturb the person speaking. Never be AFK, especially when the debate is still ongoing. You need to engage, even if you're OG, you still need to engage with CO. So yeah, never be AFK. Read the tech guide. Everything is in there. So what to expect from Adjudicator? Judges will not assess you based on your English fluency, accent, grammar precision, speed, intonation. Also, they won't assess you how much facts you know either. This is not a paper writing competition. It all boils down to logic. So please ready with this expectation. Judges will not be required to provide you with general, specific input or feedback. They are not there to coach you. They are there to judge the debate. So they will mostly provide comparison between you and your opponents in their OA. If you want further feedback or input from the judges, please feel free. This means it is optional. You don't always have to do this to ask for the judges. And if you do ask them to give you input, please do it in a kind manner. Judges will, however, be asked to explicitly compare you with others, and this may come across as harsh at times. Please have the patience to listen to what they have to say. And what to expect for feedback. You will have to score your judges after their OA or reason for the session. This is required to give us a better tracking of judges' performances. Please spare a bit time to do so. Like it's gonna affect the tournament, it's gonna affect the next judge you're going to get in the next round. So please be mindful about this. Don't base it on subjectivity. Please do not base the score on your feelings regarding the result. Just like judges should not base their score for you on their feelings regarding how much they subjectively enjoy your case. Instead, read the UDC 2020 Astana Chair scale to be shared on the score. The scale is 1 to 10. 1 means officially complain. You think that this person cannot judge. They're unable to be understood and they make no sense at all. So if you put a 1 on someone, if you give them a 1, it means that you're not going to be judged by them again. 10 does not mean perfect or it belongs to God only. It just means that they're a very good judge and their OA is very comprehensive that tackles most, if not all, the important materials in the debate and justify all the comparison. So yeah, don't hesitate to give someone a 10 if you think that their adjudication was on point. So this is the breakdown. You can see there is a range here from 1 to 10. Please use the range. Please be fair, not stingy, and be graceful even in defeat. Like if the judge is really good and unfortunately you have to get fourth in that round, doesn't mean that that judge is not a 10. Like if their comparison is strong, if they get your point, if their OA is good, you can give them a 10. And yeah, you can see this range and what does each score mean. So you can use this as like the benchmark. And most important thing, learn something from the experience. There is going to be a lot of rounds, at least 6 rounds. So there's definitely something new that you can learn from the tournament. Make new friends. You're going to meet a lot of people and you can never have too many friends. And have fun. Oh, yeah, and stay safe physically and mentally. This is the end of the debate briefing. If you guys have any question, we have the same method as before. You can leave your question in the chat or in the YouTube live stream comment. Thanks. I think we have a question from Alaya. Apa boleh ganti speaker kakak di setiap round? Yeah, this is not allowed.
So maybe I can clarify. Yeah, so you're allowed to change speaker orders. So if your partner spoke first and you spoke second in one round, you can speak first, second, but you can't leave the team and then have someone else come in. Yeah.
Oke, I think there's the follow up. Kalau tukar posisi boleh, tapi hanya antara 2 orang yang terdaftar di surat undangan ya. Yes. Oh, sorry, that. Okay, yeah. Another question. Would the educator from our university affect us as debater, like if the educator could not be present for the competition for some reason? Yeah.
Okay, I'll help answer that question from Kak Taufan. If the adjudicator is not able to be present, unless the reason is extremely important, things like probably there is massive amount of sickness, then unfortunately your team will not be able to break because it has been some sort of a contract between your university and Puspresnas when it comes to attending this event. Therefore, it is frowned upon to greatest degree if suddenly, for some reasons, adjudicators can't attend. That is not good. Okay, so please attend the competition unless there is a death in the family or there's a massive sickness and things like that. It has to be very, very, very serious for you not to be present, if that's okay.
If there's no more questions, we can wrap this up and go to the next section.
Well, if the reason is educational, then I think this tournament is educational as well. So we want to see whether or not the educational reason is more important than the commitment you have made in the process of Puspresnas. But feel free to send us an email or WhatsApp notes, most likely to Pak Rahmat, to Ibu Dora, or to Pak Nyoman. All of their contacts are there in your WhatsApp list. So please send them a message, give a clarity in terms of what the reason is, so that we can make considerations. But I will tell you that there are so many people that have been throughout the years saying to us, there are sudden commitments, these things and that things. So it is it's quite unlikely that reasons like this will be able to be accepted. It's just because there is already commitment made on this. And therefore, usually a lot of strategies from universities actually send students that are able to skip classes, not really being pulled by, I don't know, the dean or the rectors to do this and that, because that is quite difficult to sort of resort. So probably that was, I would really recommend revising strategies for NUDC in terms of assignment of people that is able to commit in all 6 rounds. But debating is different with other tournaments in the sense that it is very, very important for everybody to commit in all 6 rounds. Okay, so please do send us a message.
If there's no more question, we can wrap up the debater briefing. Thanks everyone. Kak Ubi and Kak Omar, the floor is yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. Just making sure if I'm audible. All right. This is Omar from the CAP. I will be providing the judge briefing for the first half. I will be using a mix between Indonesian and also English. So if you have any questions at any point, please just type in the chat so we can address right away, or we can do that later at the end. But first of all, welcome. This will be very useful for judges, but I think for debaters, it will be also nice to know what is expected from the judges. So that's why this judge briefing is very important. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay. All right, so why are we doing this briefing? First of all, as a judge, you are morally responsible. Participants prepare for years, they give a lot of effort, they're not assigned for their position, they cannot choose the motion they are debating in, so everything is given to them. So they deserve to be treated with the utmost dignity, respect, and fairness. So this is a serious job that breaks people's hearts. So judges, be responsible, be present, and yeah. Second, it's also important to address the skills, because adjudicating requires an in-depth understanding of debating rules. It's not just you listen to what debaters say and after that you deliver the results. There are rules and there are things that you need to understand as well. So therefore, this seminar, acts as a guideline to help both N1 judges and also invited judges to acclimate themselves to these rules. Some judges might be familiar with adjudicating in other formats than BP, but BP judging is very unique because there are 4 teams in one debate room. So it's important to recalibrate the expectation and also the orientation to judging. I think most importantly, BP debating has changed throughout the years as well. So that's why it's very important for you to pay attention, because the BP that you know probably 6 years from now, which I happen to still be around for, has changed. So that's why it's very important to be present for this. So yeah, that's exactly the evolving standard that I just talked about. So again, probably Judah has already mentioned about this as well. So just a quick introduction, what is the Chief Adjudication Panel does. In this case, we are known as CAP or Adjudication Core. So we are the heads of the adjudicators. We are the team appointed to lead the tournament, designing motions, briefing participants like what we have been doing now, accredit or allocate judges, and standardize judging and scoring. While we are not responsible for bureaucratic affairs, legal backbones, and decisions made in and around the tournament, because it's the decisions are made by the Ministry of Education and Culture, but we will be managing much of the inputs on debating standardization, topics, and adjudication. So you are more than welcome to ask any of us through Discord. We will not bite about matters pertaining to the tournament. UPI, as mentioned, is like one of the possibly the best debaters that we have in our generation. Myself, you can read that. Leah is national champion, has been in many finals of international tournaments, and Judah is the only Indonesian so far who have broken at the World's University Debating Championship. So we're more than happy to help you navigate through the tournament. All right, so there are also other officers that judges also need to be aware of. The first one is tap masters, who are managing the technical conduct, data handling, mechanical processing required for the tournament. Without handling all of those things, your scores after everyone and many other aspects, it is impossible to have a smooth online tournament. So they are the core in NUDC operation. So please treat them with respect. If they come to your room because you have not finished your OA or you have not submitted your ballot or things like that, so please be mindful as well, because they often are thankless in this job. So it's very important to maintain respect to the tap masters. Equity officers are there to address ethical complaints within the tournament. So they're here to make sure the tournament is fair, equally accessible for everyone, irrespective of your background, and safe for everyone else. So they operate independently from the CAP, the organizing committee, tap masters, etc. So their main goal is to really provide a safe space for everybody. So whoever you are in the tournament, if you feel like there's some sort of equity violation, if you're not comfortable in any sort, please go contact the equity officers. And lastly, novice officers will assess eligibility for those applying for the Novice League. They will share you all the criteria needed as they have. So, and I believe they have also shared the novice form on the debaters WhatsApp group. So please fill in immediately. You do not want to miss it, especially if you truly believe that your team is a novice team, or at least you're a novice speaker. So in this seminar, we will be talking about the basic roles of an adjudicator, the common mistakes that adjudicators typically do, the conferral process or the discussion/deliberation process, the scoring standard, the oral adjudication or the reasoning behind your decision, and lastly, conflict system. So let's go to the first part of basic roles. Technical guide first. Right, 3 types of adjudicators. Chair, typically the most experienced or trusted, but does not necessarily mean that they have like this, I would say, bukan berarti kayak panel or anyone yang bukan chair itu maka statusnya lebih rendah or anything. We're all they're equal, but in this case, the chair happens to be the most experienced and the most trusted in the panel or in the judging pool in that specific room. So panelists, you are expected to contribute to the discussion, sharing your reasoning as well. You can vote if needed. Trainee, to participate in the discussion. You will not be having voting capacity, but you have the rights to still discuss with the chair and also the panel. If let's say in any way that you're being excluded from the discussion, you're not particularly being listened to well, please tell the equity team or also to the CAP if you want to, and we will address that very, very seriously because we want everyone to avoid determinism. In this case, assuming people's ability based on their status, oh, chair will always be good. Jadi chair yang ngomong apapun kita ikutin. That's not always the case. You are more than encouraged to share your own thoughts, especially if you believe it's reasonable and it's logical to do so. The same thing applies to trainees. So that would be the 3 types of indicators. Next, we're going to talk about online sharing. Since you are the chair, if you are the chair in the round, it's very important for you to follow all of the steps, especially this is national tournament. This is a very formal tournament. So first of all, enter the room, and when the prep time or the case build time is over, announce that it is over. And after that, introduce yourself as chair. Hi, my name is Omar. I'll be your chair for the round. And make sure that your panelists and trainees are present in the room and ask them to introduce themselves in the order as they appear on the tab or alphabetically. So after that, making sure that all judges are there, they have introduced themselves. You may also ask participants to introduce themselves as a mic check. So OG, can you please tell us that you are present? And then OG would say, hi, OG is here. Prime Minister will be this, DPM will be this, even though we ask you to still put it in the chat as well, just to make sure that the ballots are all correct. So do not forget who is speaking first and who is speaking second. It's very, very fatal and it will affect the whole tab. So please, please be mindful and be careful. After that, encourage everyone to use their own timer and mention their POI preference before they speak. Sometimes debaters forget to do that. So it's very, very important for chairs to remind them. We also highly encourage chairs to also at least have some sort of timer on their own. And then you're also encouraged to time the debate as in putting the timestamps on the chat 1, 6, 7, 720, etc. So the others would also know. And after that, don't forget to also remind debaters to share their POI preference just so everybody else is aware. So yeah, the last would be make sure that everyone has done their mic check before they speak. There are some basic tech rules. It's very, very important as well in order to make sure that tournament runs smoothly. First of all, if a speaker's connection is choppy or dropped, you may wait for a maximum of 2 minutes. And in this case, if they do not return for more than 2 minutes, and unfortunately that the other speaker who is present will have to either in personing, or in this case, will have to speak twice. Second, if your chair is choppy or dropped, in this case, the judge, you may refresh and lock in, the debate will wait. If more than 3 minutes, the chair does not return, a panelist in that room will be assigned as chair. Thirdly, if your panelist or trainee is choppy or dropped, the chair and everyone will have to wait for a maximum of 2 minutes. And after that, the debate goes on, assuming that the judge is not allocated for the round. All right, next, we're going to talk about online paneling or trainee. Same thing. In this case, you are still expected to listen to the debate, pay attention, take notes, and turn on your video during control so everyone is aware and everyone knows that you are truly paying attention during discussion. So the basic roles of an adjudication, what is an adj, how do you assess a debate, we will be addressing them here. So an adjudicator, you are an average reasonable voter. So what does it mean to be an average reasonable voter? First of all, you have basic information about recent global issues accessible in general media. You know what an Overton window is. So if, let's say, you don't, you can actually Google it now. You know that Kamala Harris is actually already a VP in the US. You know that North Korea is developing a nuclear war. You know that there is a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, etc., etc. So in that case, you are expected to know all of these things because they are actually covered by the media. So therefore, that's why you're called as an average reasonable voter, because you know about things that are being reported by the media. Second, an average reasonable person is someone or voter is someone who does not use their specific knowledge or data about discussed issues to assess the debate. For example, do not assume that everyone understands how does budget expenses in companies or in organizations or in governments work, or statistics, very technical or scientific knowledge about how like a windmill works, about how a certain technology works, etc., etc. And you have to see the debate as it is, and you must not expect debaters to truly understand all of those specific knowledge and expert knowledge that you have. So that's why you are called reasonable, because in this case that you also discarding your expert knowledge and you're not using that to determine the winner in the debate. Thirdly, you are able to exert basic logical questions. So you're not exactly, oh, just because I'm expected to judge the debate as it is, it means that I will have to be a blank slate. Not really, because you can still be logical and you can still ask logical questions, but you must not step in. For example, this looks like, if let's say a team argues about why this is important atau kenapa satu argumen penting, you can ask why is it important and why is it likely, kenapa ini mungkin untuk terjadi, itu boleh. But you're not expected, oh ini nggak mungkin gara-gara saya tahu kalau Amerika itu budget untuk weaponry-nya atau apapun itu sebesar ini, jadi argumen government tidak masuk akal. That you cannot do, because that means you are exerting your expert knowledge to determine whether or not it makes sense. You can only ask logical questions, but not step in. Fourth, you are someone who is willingly persuaded by either side. In this case, you are someone who is very, very open to different ideas. You're very open to hear from multiple sides, and you are very, very open to be swayed by either side. In this case, your personal beliefs, religious, political affiliation, whatever it is, do not attach them to your average reasonable person persona. And that's why that you have to be very, very open in terms of listening to either sides. And lastly, you are not a coach, meaning that you adjudicate the debate as it happens, not the one you think should have happened. So this looks like, instead of saying, I think Oji kalah karena Oji tidak bawa argumen ini, that's not what you're supposed to do, because that means you are expecting them to deliver certain arguments and giving them the loss because of not doing that. And therefore it's something that you're not expected to do as an average reasonable person. So that's why adjudicate the debate as it happened, and please be mindful of the characteristics of average reasonable person that we have laid out here. So that would be your persona while you're judging in NUDC or in any other debate tournaments. All right, next slide. How do you track the debate? So I think the most basic part would be to listen. Listen as much as possible. So in this case, these people have prepared their speeches. They have done their research or everything else. They've read a lot of news or articles or whatever. So please do listen to what they have to say. Be mindful of that. And you also want to be listened during your deliberation. So that's why I listen to debaters. Second, take a lot of notes. In this case, we want to make sure that you really do listen in the form of these notes to confirm that you have fulfilled your listening duties, to recheck or reconfirm later after the debate has happened. Write what is said or verbatim, not what you think is said. This is to also minimize the risk of you stepping in or concluding an argument by teams that you think is going to that direction. So that's why verbatim is important, just to make sure you're not completing arguments while they're not being said or assuming how the argument would be. Thirdly, compare between what is said by debaters. It's not about, oh, this team wins because their argument is good. It's not an enough reason. You have to really compare why that argument is good, especially compared to the other 3 teams in the debate, and why then if the argument is not good, why is it the case, especially being compared with the other 3 teams in the debate. Lastly, avoid giving too much input. As mentioned in the previous slide, you're not a coach. Constructive criticism, etc., you can give them later, especially if teams ask them. So you are judge first and foremost, not a coach. So if teams ask you later on during Discord, you are expected to provide this constructive feedback, but not in the oral adjudication, not in the deliberation process. All right, what are, sorry, I think we skipped one slide. Yes. So what adjudicator should not do in this case, first of all, role fulfillment is not a thing anymore. So if you come from a generation where it says that it's very important to judge speakers based on role fulfillment, it doesn't apply anymore. So each speaker has a role to assist in their persuasiveness, right? But fulfilling them is not it does not suffice for their case to be persuasive. So you really have to assess speeches based on the level of persuasiveness. Second, you should not be time counting, which means that, let's say, timing is only to indicate whether the time has been up or not, and it's purely based on content. So if, let's say, you say the speaker is good but they only speak for 3 minutes and therefore their team loses, that doesn't apply, and therefore you should not do that as a judge. Third, always focus on content, not manner. Do not let's say give people like automatically a higher score just because they have better English accent or grammar, whatever it is, because there is a bias. This is a bias based on your upbringing. Although to a certain degree, the manner might affect the persuasiveness, and that's a clear line separating crediting only the manner just because it sounds eloquent or beautiful or what is, rather than assessing the manner that actually helps the speaker to be more persuasive. Then you can actually credit that as well. There's no difference between arguments and rebuttals. So if, let's say, a team says that my case will be integrated or etc., blah, 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 as long as the content is important to the debate, therefore you have to credit them as a whole. You don't have to, let's say, this team loses because they do not have a response to their opponent. Sometimes they are integrated and sometimes their arguments can directly clash with their opponent's case. So therefore you do not be very by the book when it comes to this. If they do not say there's no rebuttal, doesn't mean that there is none given. 5, avoid assessing individual quality of points. Always be comparative. This is what I mentioned. Team A is good because they bring this point. Why is that point important? Why is that point good? Compare with the other teams. Assess POIs too, very important, especially in assessing engagement. For example, you are judging a team, and then opening government has been, like, say, criticized by closing opposition. But then when team opening government wanted to clarify or wanted to give a POI, but team closing opposition is deliberately blocking them for giving POIs, this is not a good sign of engagement. So therefore, you have to be very considerate when it comes to assessing POIs as well, because POIs is not just for the sake of interruption or anything. It is actually a very important point in VP debating, and therefore you can actually give a team the loss if, let's say, you consider that their lack of engagement for not accepting POIs to be the case. 7, it's important then judges to understand what fiat means. In this case, if, let's say, that we are trying to implement a policy, as a judge, you can actually expect team government to actually pass the motion, because it's not about the technicalities of whether or not the motion will pass into parliament or something like that, but it's about whether or not after the implementation it's going to bring the benefits or basically those things that team government promise. So it's not about, oh, we're not going to be able to do this because in this case the parliament will not pass it. If that's the case, we're not going to have the debate. So judges, please be mindful of these arguments. If you listen to these type of arguments that, hey, we're not going to be able to do this because it will not pass in the parliament, therefore you might actually consider the team to be not engaging to the debate, because that's not that's not aligned with the concept of fiat. So you have to be very mindful as well. Lastly, do not be stuck on familiar jargon. So you have to expect teams to explain reasonably. For example, if a team talk about the present value of money, and then you are a finance person and you understand what it means, it does not mean that you should take it in face value, because you have to understand, you have to expect debaters to understand what is present versus future value of money, for example. So you cannot just expect it to be understood immediately without proper explanation. Put yourself in other people's shoes. If I'm not a finance person, would I understand that? And if the answer is no, then therefore do not just buy jargons immediately. We're going to talk about motion types now. We have covered this in the debater briefing, but it's very important for judges to understand as well, because as Judah mentioned, one of the main reasons why a team can win a debate is when they understand, when they fulfill the motion-based burden. And that is very, very important for judges to understand. Apakah tim-tim yang ada di debat ini truly understand the burden yang stipulated by the motion. So first, value judgment. This wording sounds like this house believe that, Dewan ini percaya bahwa, blah, blah, blah. This house mendukung or supports this house opposes or tidak mendukung, oppose. Yeah, can't think of the word, but basically the opposite of support. But anyway, these are also known as analysis motions, which are value judgment debates. You're not talking about a certain policy and how it should be implemented, but whether or not it's something that is good or not, and something that is of value or not. So in this case, di motion-motion seperti ini, team government harus berargumen true apa sih, or the extent of the truth of that statement, and opposition teams need to argue if it's false. So there's no need for governments to say, this is how we're going to implement the policy, and blah, blah, blah. They just should define the terms within the debate and provide a metric, and whether or not that metric is fair to be thrown in the debate. So government in value judgment debate has no fiat and has to fully support or oppose if whatever the wording says, right? So they cannot choose what aspect to support. They have to support it as a whole if it's being stipulated in the motion, or they have to oppose it in its entirety as well. So they can characterize what does it mean to support something, what does it mean to oppose something, but it is very, very fair if the opposition team wants to challenge that. And as a judge, it's very important because you need to ask, what does it mean to support something? What does it mean to the extent to which that we want to support them, blah, blah, blah. So that's why judges, you have to understand the burden and the expectations on teams for this type of motions, and you can actually assess that in your deliberation. This team loses because they're not able to fulfill the burden as required by the motion. And that is a very fair judgment of the call as well. So that's why it's very important to understand what it means. The next motion type would be preferring a world motion, or this house prefers a world in which X and this house prefers X to Y. So di motion yang pertama, di mana adalah kita Dewan ini memilih dunia ini, ya kan, in which X, di mana dunia bla 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 bla. Perbandingannya harus jelas dari team government, di mana comparison of the world containing si X tadi ini, atau contain the X phenomenon harus di-compare dengan status quo. Jadi if the wording stops at this house prefers a world in which X, therefore team government has to explain why the world with X is preferable and why the world without X, in this case status quo, or the world that we know today, is not preferable. The opposition therefore nggak bisa create a new world di mana ada Y, jadi itu adalah jadi counterfactualnya. No, opposition needs to defend status quo. So the abstract is, as seen here, X is less important than status quo, and therefore proving X itu dibandingkan dengan Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, whatever it is, it's meaningless because that's not what's expected in the debate. So judges need to understand this. So if an opposition says, we're not going to defend status quo, we're going to defend a world with Y or with Z, that's not the burden that opposition needs to fulfill. So therefore, it's very fair for you to utilize that in your deliberation. So example, this house prefers a world in which people are not able to see aesthetics. So opposition has to defend status quo where people are able to see aesthetics. So opposition are not expected to defend, we want a world which people are not able to see and feel aesthetics. So it's an entirely different debate. So therefore, you should not do that as opposition, but as a judge, you need to understand what is expected. The second type is this house prefers X to Y. Di sini perbedaannya adalah kalau the world in which X, blah blah blah, perbandingannya harus status quo. But if the wording is this house prefers X to Y, government needs to defend X, and why is that the case? And opposition needs to defend Y instead of X, and why is that the case? So in this case, opposition again tetap nggak bisa creating a new item, in this case Z, Karena motionnya udah jelas-jelas mengatakan you need to defend why. This house prefers Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders. Government ya harus defend Hillary Clinton is better than Bernie Sanders. Opposition nggak bisa bilang, oh we're not going to prefer Bernie Sanders. We are going to prefer Andrew Yang instead, or Michael Bloomberg, or whoever it is. No, use what's stipulated on the motion. Therefore, as judges, you need to understand kalau tim governmentnya kabur atau dari wording yang udah disediakan, atau begitupun tim opposition, be mindful you can actually use that as a reasoning in your decision. Third motion type would be policy debate. So policy debate ada dua tipe. Yang pertama, this house would X, this house would blah 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 blah, or this house believe that X should do blah blah blah. Yang kedua, atau yang di sini adalah yang di atas, itu also known as a soft policy motion, because in this case, even though you are a neutral observer, you believe that someone should do X or someone should do something about it. So in this case, the debate is whether or not the statement is true from the perspective of a neutral observer, bukan dari perspektif X. Artinya adalah, just imagine that you're having a casual conversation with your friends and you believe that, Amerika aneh banget deh. Kayaknya mereka harusnya ngekontrol gun ownership nggak sih di sana? So you believe that they should do it. So, but in that case, even though it's phrased as an analysis, a policy is being implemented. Think of it this way: you want one party to do something, so therefore you kind of suggest what they need to do and what they can do, right? Amerika harusnya punya gun ownership control. Menurut aku caranya harus kayak gini. So imagine that the debate is like that. So in this case, this house believe that NATO should invade Afghanistan. In this case, you have to see it from a neutral observer perspective about why NATO should invade Afghanistan, what are the benefits of that, and what are the risks of that, but it's still a better side on your world. And in judges' perspective, you actually need to understand how it's going to be at least implemented. They do not have a fiat in this case because they are not the actor, but they are the ones who are able to suggest about how likely things are going to play out, how the invasion is going to look like. So therefore, it is a policy motion. So there's some sort of explanation about how things would be implemented, and OG is expected to give definitions. The second policy type, the second motion type, which in policy debate, would be this house would X this. So if nggak ada tulisannya as siapa, tulisannya nggak ada this house believe that blah 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 should blah blah blah, and it only says this house would blah blah blah, you have to assume that this house is the state. This house is the government. Right? So the question of the debate is whether or not the state, apakah pemerintah harus enact that policy. So OG is encouraged to propose a model gimana the policy will be implemented. So for example, this house would ban zoos. You have to assume that the state throughout the world would want to ban zoos. Remember, I think Leah already mentioned that you should not limit a debate unless it is stated in the motion. So you have to assume that these type of motions apply in generally like a working or a functional democracy. So you must not say that it happens in Indonesia and Indonesia will not be able to ban zoos. If it's not being mentioned in the motion, then do not limit it to certain countries. Next, I believe it's a regret motion, a variation of preferring a world motion. In this case, this house regrets X means that you have to explain. Di sini regret tuh bukan cuma menyayangkan ya, tapi kayak benar-benar berharap ada yang lain di luar dari X, contohnya Y. So it is required dari semua tim government untuk menjelaskan alternatifnya seperti apa kalau X tidak ada. So judges, you need to understand that it is actually okay to expect government teams or at least any other teams to explain what is the counterfactual atau alternatifnya apa ketika X tidak ada. So that's why tim yang tidak bawa counterfactual atau tidak menjelaskan counterfactual yang kemungkinan terjadi itu bukan berarti harus dipenalize, but you can also ask questions regarding whether or not what is likely to happen because it will affect the quality of the debate. So this debate is in retrospect, meaning that you know that X exists, but you want to regret it, and therefore if X doesn't exist, what will take place in absence of X? So contohnya, this house regrets the rise of NATO after the fall of the USSR. Counterfactualnya, terserah tim government, tapi harus dijelaskan kenapa itu likely. Likelihoodnya itu adalah, oh NATO tidak rise, maka yang rise itu adalah apa? Mungkin negara-negara kecil, negara-negara non-block yang naik atau whatever it is. As long as team government explains that, that should be enough. But it's very important for you to understand what is expected from a regrets motion. There needs to be a counterfactual. So you can actually also incorporate that in the reasoning between, or the comparison between teams. Next would be actor motion. So, sorry, no worries. All right, so actor debates can be a combination of all of the motion types that I've mentioned. In this case, this house atau dewan ini sebagai blah blah blah, akan blah blah blah, percaya bahwa blah blah blah, whatever it is. The debate is again from the state, whether or not the statement is true from the perspective of the actor mentioned in the debate, not from the perspective of a neutral observer. So teams must consider pengetahuan atau knowledge dari actor X, value-nya mereka apa, kepentingannya mereka apa, kebolehan mereka apa, and why then the motion is or is not within the interest of the actor X. So it's not about whether or not the action that is being stipulated in the motion itu adalah untuk kebaikan seluruh umat berbahagia di dunia ini, tapi memang spesifik kenapa X yang dimention harus atau malah tidak seharusnya melakukan hal tersebut. Principles tetap important, tidak ada istilah principle tidak lebih penting dibandingkan practical. Very important as judges to understand that. So that's why, for example, you need to assess it holistically as well. And you can actually realize kalau misalnya ada tim yang benar-benar tidak menjelaskan dari perspektif aktor tertentu, you can actually ask that in the deliberation. I think team opening government tidak menjelaskan kenapa ini adalah dalam kepentingannya United States atau Joe Biden atau apapun itu, sehingga kasusnya mereka menjadi kurang persuasif. That's completely fine. All right, moving on. Assessing content, which is very, very important for judges. First of all, apa yang harus di take into account ketika kita sedang meng-assess konten yang di-present oleh teams? Number one, apakah mereka menjelaskan poinnya dengan baik? Apakah prosesnya dijelaskan? Contohnya itu adalah, oh, kalau kita melakukan policy ini, maka orang-orang akan sakit atau orang-orang akan semuanya mengalami kerugian miliaran rupiah. Apakah ada proses yang dijelaskan untuk mencapai konklusi tersebut? Kalau tidak ada, then probably is not necessarily a complete content. Apakah ada penjelasan tentang itu penting atau tidak, significant atau tidak? So you can ask of these questions. Remember, you're an average caliber person. You're not someone who is not open to be critical as well. You can actually ask that. Second, just because an argument has more airtime does not mean it is an argument with better quality. So you have to be mindful as well. Probably in 7-minute speeches, you can hear a lot of things, but you could also hear repetitive things that have been explained over and over again. Doesn't mean that just because they speak for 7 minutes or just because an argument is delivered within 5 minutes and you think it is a very important argument and therefore is very, very necessary to be counted, not necessarily the case, because airtime is not the same with the quality. Again, I think we have mentioned this, POI is crucial to change the dynamics of a case. Again, be considerate, does not mean nggak ngambil POI, maka pasti kalah. Never use that as a reasoning. CO kalah sama OG karena CO nggak mau ngambil POI dari OG. That should not be the reason. The reason should still be the comparison and engagement between teams. And POI is one of the ways to use that. So it's very important to take into account what it means for a POI to be dismissed. Second assessment is the meta debate. The third burden in BP that Judah mentioned in the debate briefing, everyone often forget, itu adalah why your point is more important than any other teams in the debate. So especially for closing, this is very important because you want to be seen as fresh. You want to be seen as not the same with your opening, even though you're operating in the same principles and operating in the same conclusions. Regardless, you have to explain why you are necessarily more important than your opening teams. Opening teams can do this too. Closing might talk about this, they might expand the debate, blah, blah, blah. But judges, this is the most important part of the debate. And second part, appreciate framing, appreciate teams who explain why it's more important than the other. So you need to be mindful of that too. And next slide, please. Extension, again, new points must be framed against existing arguments. Kenapa ini argumennya baru, kenapa argumennya lebih penting. Responses juga bisa extension. So apapun yang dibawa oleh team closing, as long as it's new, it is thought as extension. Vertical extension bisa aja same point, but with more substance yang lebih meaningful. Dan itu nggak bisa dijelaskan kemenangannya oleh judges dengan team closing punya more explanation. You need to explain why that more explanation is more substantial. Nggak cuma gara-gara ada penjelasan tambahan sedikit. You have to explain why that is necessarily a tiebreaker between opening and closing teams. I'm giving it all to Upi. Thank you, everybody.
All right, just checking, am I audible? Good. Wonderful. So I'm not using my headset because there's problems with that. So do let me know if there's background noises that starts to get annoying or anything like that. So going through the last part of the judge briefing is common mistakes. Here's some of the things I would like to request all judges to avoid. All right, the first is judges who are not fair and equal in imposing burdens. Remember that any question you ask to certain teams need to be asked to other teams as well. For instance, if one team is asked to prove X, then X needs to be asked as to whether or not that's proven or responded or dealt in some ways by other team. Try to impart same burden to all teams at all times. Number two, define your metric of contribution, such as scale and scope of impact, likelihood, importance, etc., and make sure you are fair in applying these metrics to teams. If a team lost because they were not comparative in a certain clash, make sure that the team who won has indeed was a team that comparative in that clash, and just make sure that anything that you tick down from some teams is always justified to be given a credit to another team. But finally, certain teams have certain points have different burdens, certain positions have different burdens. For instance, closing teams have a higher burden of response than opening teams naturally because they have 14 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes extra to case build after their opening speaks, right? So then they have to give much bigger responses as opposed to the opening who has to speak immediately after the prep time finishes. So do take these things into account. Positioning matters. The other common mistake that happens is that the presence of a point is included as valid. For instance, the common mistake is, they've said this. They've had a response. They've had an extension. That's not always a point in which you have to credit, because the presence of something, a rebuttal, an extension, a mechanism, etc., does not prove that it is indeed suffice, or it is better than other thing that has already existed. So don't think about mere presence alone. Think about values. Another thing is about being left out. This is a common thing we hear, especially in past years of adjudication. The common mistake says, your material was left out, sorry, you lose. That's not a good judging, because a lot of teams actively avoid strong materials because they just don't know how to deal with these strong materials, right? Or maybe they're just being shady. So as a judge, you must not credit this behavior. If teams run away from their supposed burden, it's not your job to credit them by saying that, that team who's good, but unfortunately everyone else decided to gang up against that team and leave them, is a team that has to bear all the consequences of other teams conspiring against them, because that would be bad. Another thing that needs to be avoided is dealing with contradictions too easily. The common mistake is when a judge says, there was a contradiction in that speaker, so that speaker is worthless, or that case goes down entirely. This is unholistic judging, because contradiction can be many, many things. Like, it could be a slight of word, for instance, salah ucap ya, gitu, karena English is not our first language, perhaps. Or maybe it's just a little contradiction that's not too fatal, it's not too substantial, or maybe there's some that is quite substantial and then you can make a big deal out of it, or maybe contradictions that matter, but nobody pointed out in the debate. All of these things need to be taken into account when you assess contradictions, and please refer to the WUDC manual as well that says, in the presence of a contradiction, you take the first statement as true, and therefore that first statement considered to be true will still have to be dealt with by other teams. And then the other kind of error in judging is to demand more. More is the only metric, which is to say, oh, they've explained more. They spend more time on it and they're not under time, more time and more sentences, all of these things. And therefore that's good. This is wrong in terms of PV judging because more does not always mean better. Things could be over elaborated, things that does not need to be elaborated anymore because you understand it as an average reasonable person, or additions may not be important enough. Yeah, do take these things into account so that you don't punish people simply because they say things shorter. Undertime is not an automatic mark of a bad contribution as well, which is something that we're going to explain later on in the debrief. Some judges are probably a little bit too harsh if people go down under 7 and things like that. Please don't take that into account too much, because the reason why undertiming speakers perform bad is because they maybe miss some things if they don't have more airtime, but not because of simply speaking for 6 minutes. Okay. The other problem that needs to be avoided by judges, and this is quite important, is underscoring and reputation, or Beyonce's beautiful song, Halo. In debates, it's not good. The common mistake says, it wasn't that good, or it wasn't as good as speaker X, possibly somebody with reputation. And this is bad because then mathematically, judges are not calibrating the score that they have as a preference because they learn a certain way from their trainings or because they've received certain scores in previous tournaments. Don't use that, of course, in judging NUDC. Please mathematically calibrate your score according to the standards of this tournament, and don't let your biases influences your scoring. In Indonesia, unfortunately, there is a trend of underscoring. It seems to be harder getting 81 in Indonesia as opposed to in ADP or as opposed to in Worlds even, which is concerning. It might be something that we need to look at in terms of trends happening in the circuit. The other thing is also be careful of reputational bias. All institutions are supposedly seen the same in NUDC, and there's absolutely no reason to believe that institutions having a certain name, having a certain pedigree, or coming from certain regions should be deemed as better a priori or only on the behest of that institution as opposed to others. And there is absolutely no reason as well to see speakers with more reputable names or with more famous track records be better than others who don't. Yeah, just avoid these biases because that can be quite scary and unfair if you do so. Finally, it's what Omar has mentioned before very clearly. Don't step in, don't put expert knowledge, set your expectation of responses, but not beyond basic logical inquiries, and don't fill the gap for debaters and everything that is in this slide. Avoid them. Okay, so these common mistakes reinforce the previous part. So after you do all of that, after as a judge, you're operating in a technically good way, you're making comparisons, you're assessing the meta as well as the content, and you're avoiding common mistakes, what do? You enter the conferral process, okay? And this works for chair and panel and trainees. Before the conferral process, which is what we call also deliberation, reaching a verdict, because in VP you have 4 teams, you can't have too many splits. You must come together and discuss the discussion. And that is done via 5 ways. The first is that take 1 or 2 minutes to consult your notes and confirm certain things. And then number 2, judges individually decide their ranks. It doesn't have to be exactly the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, but you may sort of like say, I have this team is 1st, this team is 2nd. I don't really know who gets 3rd and 4th. Basically, I'm okay with either way getting whichever rank they go because I think it's quite close. That's completely fine. And then after that, the decision will be decided through a deliberative conferral process. Jadi ngobrol ya, ini semuanya harus musyawarah. After that, the decision will be finalized. Only the chair will fill in the adjudication sheet. So if you're not the chair, do not put in any scores or results because this will make it difficult for the tab team to confirm. Once again, if you're not the chair, do not fill in ballots. Finally, the chair will provide the oral adjudication to the teams, explaining the reasons. If the chair minds giving the oral adjudication because the chair dissents, then the chair will appoint a panel member to deliver the OA instead. But the chair can still and should still deliver the OA if they feel comfortable, even though they're dissenting. Okay. Now, in the conferral process, what does it look like? First and foremost, after you consult your notes, you can formulate an initial call, isolate one or two most important points from a team, and prioritize in order of what is most important. Not the first thing they said was this, the second thing they said was this, timeline-wise. We all know it as judges because we heard the same debate. Probably it's more useful for you to rank it in the basis of importance. For instance, the second thing they said was most important. I want to discuss that first. Here's how it goes. The second thing they said was the first thing that happened in the debate, but that's less important, so I want to discuss that second. That will be crucial in order to maximize the 10 minutes deliberation time that you have so that it incorporates all sorts of prioritization that needs to happen. After that, the conferral process should start with an initial call. Which team did you give first, second, third, fourth to? Do not justify it yet, but you can lean on certain benches, you can all of those things, but just have an initial call first. No scoring for the start of the conferral. Okay, you can calibrate the scores later on after consensus is reached. So this is how you start the conferral. Now, how do you then navigate the conferral process? For chairs, please moderate. You may want to start with the most contentious calls first. So if a team is clearly first, everyone is agreeing on that, you may want to deprioritize that discussion and revisit that if you have time, but you may want to start with the ones that everyone is quite different about. And then chairs, please ask exact members of the panel to explain. Don't just say, oh, who want to start the discussion? I'm opening the floor for everybody. Come on, guys, let's talk. It's probably less effective. You may want to say, hey, you gave the most different decision. Maybe you want to start explaining that first, and then I'll move on to the other member of the panel to explain. And then after that, we'll see how it goes. That would be much better and much more exact and save you time. When people are starting to go on too long, do cut them off and make sure that they're talking about the exact thing you want them to talk about as chairs. For instance, if they have to compare between OG and OO, and they started talking about giving a very long summary of what OG talked about in the debate, you may say, stop it, can we please move on to the comparison? Well, of course, you want to do that more politely than what I just did, but you know what I mean. Just make sure people are succinct. Yeah, and also on chairs, please be topical. Don't go on different rambles about different parts of the debate because it's a very, very dynamic process. Stick to the precise two teams comparison at a time is usually good. If we're discussing OG and OO, stick to that. Talk about the closing bench later on, but vice versa. You know what I mean? After that, you want to identify the key points in that comparison, usually two arguments from OG to compare with OO. That's it. The other thing you can sort of like talk about later on, just in the interest of time. And if point X is discussed, for instance, let's talk about economy in that test debate, right? You may want to discuss about other things that is not economy later on, maybe 2 minutes later, just so that discussion can be focused. That would be how a good panel consensus or a good conferral happens. Now, how do you reach a consensus? It's just really quickly. Conferral is an exchange of thought, not another debating arena. So as much as possible, be nice to each other. And number two, constantly listen. Please be genuinely interested, thank you, Andre, in what the others have to say. Number three, don't have bias. Oh, you have your panel, so maybe your opinions are worth less than mine. That is not always correct. Number four, when you disagree, you may want to instead rebut, formulate them in questions that prompt other panelists to answer. For instance, that point makes sense, but what do you think about this point that needs to be highlighted? Or how did they prove that this was correct? Or what do you think about this? Something like that. But ask them questions so that the other person can answer, vice versa. So it's a back and forth in terms of question and answer. And then finally, you want to note that missing certain things is very common in VP, even as experienced as some of the CFP members are. You can still sometimes see things that are missing in debates. I mean, I do that all the time because it's very short between when the debate finishes and when you start the discussion, right? You have no room to ponder. So it's completely fine to change your decisions just be helpful in the conferral process, because that will be part of your assessment. You can't be too submissive, but you can't be too headstrong or too stubborn either. Finally, a bad judge is a stubborn judge. Be open-minded, listen to others, but when you need to split because you just can't agree with the decision that is given, that's fine. You may have to justify your split though. Don't let ego get the best of you and all that kind of thing. But if you've considered all that and there is still a deadlock, take a vote. Okay, that should happen at the end of the deliberation process. So if you have only 15 minutes to deliberate, no further time can be given, even in out rounds, ideally. Okay, so please make sure that you are within your time frame and just keep track on time at all times. Don't let it go too long, because that would really disrupt the tournament if suddenly a 15 minutes deliberation turned into 5 times of that. Okay, that would be for voting and also conferral process. I'm going to breeze through the scoring standards. Please look at this list. This is already shared. This is basically the same thing as the Warsaw scale that is normally used in UDC and WUDC. So just read through this very quickly. I would like to also ask you to refer to scores that are available in Worlds, in ABP, as well as in previous NUDCs, to look at how 81, 82, 90, if ever, 75 manifests in this tournament, because obviously you can't just translate this into a debate using your subjective perspectives and then, oh, this is a 91 speech. It's probably a bit unreasonable. That's why it's really important to sort of like look at various tournaments as well to calibrate your mathematical translation of what you heard in the debate accurately. In terms of assessing fellow judges, just look at this as well. So I'm not gonna, read all of these things, but basically 1 to 4 is a trainee, 5 to 7 is panelists, and 8 to 10 is a chair. This is also to indicate that anybody who received 5.0 or higher in the judge test will be assigned a panelist position. And later on, we'll see how many chairs we have based on that. So if you are a panelist later on after the judge test, just know that your scores is either 5.0 or absolutely higher than that. Finally, this is just some screenshots of what the ballot looks like. Look at the ballots. You have upper corner is OG, upper right corner is OO, lower left corner is CG, lower what do you call it? Right corner is CO. The speaking order is like this. Basically mimics the debating room. So just make sure you put the right name in the right places, and then you put the right number assigned to the right person on the respective column, and everything will be sorted out for you, like the rank, the margin, and the total speaker score that is allotted for each team. The other ballot that you must fill is a Google form ballot, just to make sure the numbers you inputted in Tabby is the same with what you intended. So this is basically a safeguard, yeah? Fill in both ballots if you're a chair, and we expect this to happen before the OA is given. Once again, before the OA is given, fill out the Tabby ballot and Google ballots. If you are a panelist and trainee and you want to remind the chair to fill both these things before moving on to the OA, please do so. We'll appreciate that. For feedback, this is what you can do. Just put in who you're giving feedback to, their score, did you agree, and some comments. We would appreciate comments, so fill in the comment section with what you think is appropriate to say about these persons, and then that would be really helpful. Finally, OA, just make sure in time, immediately announce the ranks, make comparisons, avoid constructive feedback or input. The reason for that is that OAs should last only 10 minutes or less, like your test. If you focus on constructive feedback or input, you lose precious time in that 10 minutes to justify your comparisons. So focus on comparisons as much as possible, unless you're very confident the quality of your comparison will not be hurt by giving constructive feedback or input. That's it for the OA. After that, the conflict system. A conflict system is basically when a judge can't judge a certain team or a certain speaker because some things happen. Usually a conflict of interest manifests when their objectivity is compromised. Maybe there is a unique relationship, such as attending the same institution or university, coming from the same club, doing a lot of jobs together, or maybe being in a romantic relationships. Maybe you've been close and there's bad blood, there's bad breakups, things like that. These are things that you yourself can judge as to whether or not I'm too involved with this person in professional sense or personal sense, to the degree that I can't judge them properly. This can happen midway in a tournament. So if conflicts arise midway, do let your equity officers know so that we can avoid all of these situations in which people question your judgment, because I know these two persons are close. Why are they judging each other? These things, if you can't justify, it's probably going to be bad. So yeah, just make sure this is on top of your mind as well. Declare your conflicts during the accreditation. If new things arise, as I said, tell the AdCore, tab team, but equity officers would be great to declare your conflict to as well. That's it. Thank you so much for listening, and we would like to open the floor for question and answers. I believe you don't have any questions, right? Is there any in YouTube? Yeah, I am. Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Andre. Okay, the question is, hi, CFP, let's say a judge's connection drops and they miss 1 or 2 speeches but are present for the rest of the debate. How should we include them in conferral or assign them score for panel or trainee? The answer to this is that if you miss 1 or 2 speeches, that's quite fatal. That's like 14 minutes worth of missing, or maybe 7. So if you miss these things, do let your chair know immediately. After first 10, 20 seconds of judge's connection dropping and it's bad, do let people in the panel know. If at the end of the day you have to miss entire speeches, then ideally that judge will still be able to make comparisons in other parts of the debate that does not include that 1 or 2 speech. But if it already includes that 1 speech, it would be very, very difficult for them to have a say. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Omar.
So as mentioned earlier in the tech brief, that if, let's say, a panel or trainee cuts off more than 2 minutes, you can actually, again, tell the tab or CAP no immediately, just so we can drop them from the tab if necessary.
Yeah.
So that would be like the general rule of thumb. But in special cases, they might like drop off 30 seconds, cut back, drop off again. So that would be very, very conditional. So just be mindful of the context of the situation. But in any case, please let us all the time if there's such instances, so we will know what to do.
Menjawab ya. Ya, selanjutnya, seluruh adjudicator selalu harus hadir setiap round nih. Yes, jawabannya iya. Semua adjudicator harus selalu hadir di setiap round. Makanya mungkin ini bisa jadi catatan juga buat teman-teman, mungkin untuk NUDC ke depannya, saat memilih N1 adjudicator, sebaiknya adalah orang yang memang bisa komit. Seperti itu. Jadi kadang-kadang ada persepsi bahwa juri itu harus mungkin yang lebih senior gitu ya. Cuman kan kalau lebih senior mungkin tanggung jawab juga lebih banyak, jadi lebih susah untuk komit. Ya, jadi untuk kedepannya mungkin bisa dicari aja yang memang bisa komit. Kalau dari mahasiswa pun nggak apa-apa kok, banyak N1 yang dari mahasiswa bagus sekali gitu ya. Jadi itu bisa jadi pertimbangan kedepannya dalam memilih adjudicator. Silahkan disampaikan ke kampus masing-masing. Kemudian pertanyaan kedua, setiap round masing-masing adjudicator memberikan pendapat selama 10 menit begitu? Tidak. Ya, jadi setelah roundnya selesai, semua juri dalam satu panel ya kan akan ngobrol musyawarah tentang apa hasil terbaik untuk ruangan ini. Nanti dalam ngobrolnya itu mungkin akan dapat 2 menit, mungkin akan dapat 3 menit, tergantung flow of the discussion. Ya, nanti keputusannya adalah keputusan bersama setelah berembuk itu dari satu panel secara keseluruhan. Oke? Semoga menjawab ya Alpino ya. Ya. Next question. Based on my understanding then, every N1 just had a chance either being panels or training every round and it's based on our feedback score we get? Absolutely not. If N1 is not a mark of quality, you are going to be assigned chair as an N1 if your score is really good. And that happened last year. We got 4 N1 chairs last year in preliminary 1, and we have a lot of N1s being panel. Okay, so we don't care your IA, N1, whatever you are. If you're a good judge and you perform well in the judge test, we're going to put you as chairs. And later on, after performances in each round, you're going to get feedbacks. We're going to incorporate the score of that feedback as well to assign you in the later round, if that makes sense. Yeah. Any questions? Sorry. I hope that answers your question, Balkis. Ada pertanyaan lain mungkin? Oke. Pertanyaan selanjutnya. Kemungkinan jadi chair, yes, bisa. Pertanyaannya dari Cindy, dari tadi dulu aku ya kayaknya ya. Kalau ada debater yang commit equity violation, what should we do? First and foremost, report that to equity officers as soon as possible with the form that they're going to share. Do note that our equity officers are Muti and Gio. They're already in the participants list and judges WhatsApp group as well. Reach them as soon as possible. Yeah. In terms of how does that affect decision, it does not always affect the decision because maybe one part of the speech is problematic equity-wise. It should not invalidate the entire case. You may want to take that part, that point exactly, is not something that is persuasive to you. But maybe 7 other points that the speaker is bringing is persuasive and they can still win around. You may want to note that in your OA or in the deliberation, but it's not an either or situation where, ada satu equity violation, tim ini kalah gitu, automatic fourth nggak kayak gitu. Yeah, make sure you still apply holistic judging principles. Good. Are there any other questions? We still have one more. Oh yeah. Oke, kalau gitu ini pertanyaan saya dari Syahdania. Setelah ini nanti kalau ada pertanyaan lain boleh di WhatsApp group, kita akan jawab secepat mungkin. Pertanyaannya adalah, if we become a panelist or trainee, can we get feedback from our chair? And where do we get the feedback? In a Discord voice or personal chat in Discord? Thank you. Absolutely can. This is an educational tournament as well. So if you're a panelist or trainee and you want some feedback from your chair, just ask them. Our chairs are very, very experienced, but also they should be willing to let you know where things can be improved, or if you have specific questions regarding the decision, etc. Where you can do that, it's completely fine. Just make arrangements with your chair. Some chairs prefer WhatsApp, some chairs prefer Discord, or maybe other kind of social media, in IG private message, for instance, because they use IG a lot. Whatever it is that's comfortable for both of you. Okay, the best. Okay, thank you so much. Ya, ya. Nanti banyak voice channel di Discord juga, jadi ya di arrange masing-masing aja ya. Shall we go to the judges debrief, and we'll just breeze this very quickly. I know that this is quite late. It's already 5 p.m. So hopefully we can finish that in 30 minutes. Without further ado, I'm passing it to Leah for the judge debrief, starting with the true or false section.
Hi everyone, hello. I hope I'm audible and visible. Yep. So we're going to talk about the judge staff debrief. Next slide. Firstly, we're going to talk about the DNF section. Yeah, congratulations to the Fifth Harmony, Jane, Nadira, Felicia, Anisha, and Rakyan for scoring perfectly. The average score is 7.8. Like what we have repeated a lot, do not ignore POI. Speaker will be punished for not receiving POI. This can make them lose in a close call. OA can be good without feedback. You are there to judge, not as a coach, and more on the following slide. So first question, a judge should strongly consider imposing score deduction for a speaker who refuses to take any POI. This is true according to the WDC manual. POIs are crucial to signify that the speaker is dynamic and engaging enough. This is similar with low response speech. And yeah, there is recently a upsetting trend of less POI taken. So we hope to change that, to see a change in this year tournament. Second, THBT execute motion can be a policy motion. This is true. I think the other CAP has explained this briefly earlier, that this can be a quasi policy motion. So while we're the THBT, execute may mean somebody doing an action has consequences, and how that action is done determines what consequence it brings, and therefore a lot of policy element here. This is soft policy, and please refer to the judge briefing under policy debate. Next. A house proposing this house regrets motion is required to discuss counterfactual. This is true, like what the other CAP also has explained. This does not just mean menyayangkan. You would want something else to happen instead. So there should be counterfactuals. Pretty straightforward. Next question. Style can play a role in the persuasiveness of a speech and must be judged holistically alongside analysis. This is true. Remember, the core of BB judging is being holistic in describing persuasiveness. Style, including things but are not limited to clarity, wording, emphasis, tone, is a very important component in persuasion. Style is not about preferring certain ways of speaking over other, nor it is about grammar. It would be it would be unfair to favor a style over substance. But those kind of things should be judged holistically. That's the point. Next, six-way comparison, either by rank or chronological, is required element of your OA. This is true. Comprehensively comparing the debate required you to prove why you decided that first get the rank that they get, why second rank won over the other two teams, why third rank won over fourth, and therefore it's a six-way comparison. Some of us are probably way more familiar with the ladder judging, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4. But the reason why we do not encourage this is because this is incomplete, and bench-based, like why opening one against closing, why op versus gov judging is also strongly discouraged unless you have a really good reason to do so. A good OS should include general feedback. This is false. We've explained this. A lot, that you're there to make comparison within the teams. So a good AA should also be efficient. You have 10 minutes. It's not a coaching session, so use your time wisely. In policy debates, principal argument should weigh less than practical argument. This is untrue. Principal has the same weight as practical arguments. Principal can help establish important analysis about a policy such as mandate, ethics, and morality, and team should make active weighing why then the argument that they bring matter more than the others. It is strongly recommended to describe a policy or mechanism in most this house believe that motion. This is false, while some THBT motion can be a policy debate. Most THBT motion are simple value judgment, in which first, you don't have any fiat to enact policy, and second, mechanism would be needed as the debate should be broad and straightforward. When a contradiction is successfully identified by a speaker, the act of identifying the contradiction is enough to give the speaker enough credit in taking. This is untrue because, like what KUP and Kaumar has explained before, you need to judge the debate holistically. Identifying a contradiction per se is not enough to take down the majority of the case. The speaker must explain why that contradiction matters greatly. And second, there's still a burden to respond to the earlier stage statement, which according to the WDC manual is assumed to be true. A speaker spends 3 minutes explaining their point using multiple layers and prongs and subpoints, certainly this will be superior to an explanation that is only approximately 1 minute in length. This is totally untrue. There is no extra point in for speaking in more minutes. There is such thing as over elaborating what is already clear. Repetition can add more airtime than needed. Short explanation can still be very deadly. Like pure statistic and raw data about a given topic can act as a structural analysis in BP debates. This is untrue. Statistic and data should be an addition or supplement to structural analysis, not a replacement. Debate should explain what does those numbers mean and why they're important. And many statistics and data are very specific, making them inaccessible for you as an average reasonable voter. Okay. Explaining and mechanizing more is enough for you to justify giving a closing team against their opening. This is untrue. There is a concerning trend that judges stop their justification and comparison within teams by saying that, oh, they explain more without further investigation, which can lead to unfair advantages for opening teams. Yeah, of course, closing have more time to case build. So just explaining more doesn't always mean that they give greater contribution to the debate. More mechanization does not justify a win, especially against a team who already has a degree of mechanization on their own. There is such thing as over elaboration. Teams must explain why their additional mechanization has more value than the previous one, and judges should also be able to explain what value it has, not just because they add something. Next. So that's it for section 2, multiple choices, giving it to Ka Omar.
All right, I'll be addressing the multiple choices questions. So this is the statistics. So unfortunately, there is a low median out of possible 18 points. The average is 10.05. So most scores drop at the 5th and 6th question, which we will address, but we would like to give a shout out to Nova, Anugrah, and Robbie Hermanto for scoring the highest, 15 out of 18 possible points. So great job, keep up the good work. And let's address the question one by one. So the first question is cancel culture. I know it's a very long question, but you can read this as you have also been shared the document on the group as well. So that would be the question in a way that you're judging around with the motion that, or OG argued that cancel culture is bad in most instances. And while even if some cancel culture is deemed justified by the society, it is still bad because it worsens the court of public judgment that oftentimes forego legal proceedings and is often blown out of proportion. OG didn't explain why the court of public perception will not exist, or at least minimize on their side. They just said it's a harm on their side. OO said then cancel culture should not be regretted because bad people deserve to have their lives ruined or the wrong things that they did. This is the only extent of logical string that you heard from OO. CO then came into the debate arguing that the court of public judgment should be out of the debate because without cancel culture, that thing still exists anyway. CO then extended why even in the most dire of circumstances, cancel culture is an important cultural movement as it marks the beginning of oppressed individuals reclaiming their agency from their oppressors, etc., etc. So what is the likely outcome of the debate? First of all, OG is likely, if not certainly, wins against OO because OO did not respond to the argument on how the court of public judgment will be worse and can bypass legal consequences, even if OG never explained why such a thing will not exist, or at least minimize on their side. But this can still be considered an OG win because OO failed to respond, which is one of the the core tenets of being an opposing team in debate, that you have to respond, right? The second answer, CO wins against OO because CO is more charitable in engaging with OG's argument. In this case, hey, we want to engage to the court of public judgment's argument because it will not be gone. So therefore mitigating the harm that OG explained. And in this case, mitigation is saying that the harm is not as big as what the opening government claimed. So therefore, it's likely then for CO to win over OO because of that contribution. But the other two things then, OO still wins against CO because even if CO explained the counterfactual, OO still wins. Is not a correct issue. It's not a correct interpretation of the debate because in this case, CO had more, simply more explanation about the debate. And the last answer, not enough information. There is actually enough information. So in this case, that's not the correct answer to this question. The second multiple choice question is OG's 4 argument. OG has 4, OO successfully destroyed 1, CO responded to the other 3. The answer, technically, OG has no materials left. It's not a correct answer because in that case, again, you're not tallying, you're not counting. So therefore, there is some sort of contribution that OG still has. So that's why the first answer is incorrect. Second, OO is likeliest to fall under the long diagonal, meaning that potentially speaking, CO and also OG might win over OO because in this case, CO engaged to OG better. OO did not engage to the extent that CO did. That's why probably OO could lose against OG. But in that case, the long diagonal, in this case, OG and CO, in case you're not familiar with the phrase, short diagonal is CG versus OO, in case you're wondering. But regardless, the long diagonal is more engaging. So that's why OO is likely to fall under them. CO can win against OG only if they took PI from CG, not necessarily the case. So that's why that in that case, you can actually assess the debate as it's being engaged. Fourth answer, CO should win the debate for giving the strongest response. Again, just because they respond to more does not necessarily mean it is the strongest response. So it's not the correct answer as well. And lastly, OG should be credited for proving a lot in their case, right? Making life in that round difficult for OO and CO. So they should still be credited. Even if OO, let's say, managed to debunk 1, it does not mean that OG's merit should be discounted. So again, assign credit based on teams, not bench. In this case, just because OO also responded means that OG loses over OO. That's not the case. You have to compare team by team. OO clearly has not done enough because that's the context given. If OG fell, it's largely due to CO's contribution. So more likely that CO wins over OG, but not enough reason to put reason O above OG. Remember, it's not acceptable to say OO wins against OG because CO managed to disprove all of OG's point, therefore OG had no contribution left. You should credit that as CO's contribution, not OO's contribution. So there's no way to justify the OO win because of that. So that's why contribution is very important. OG has to be credited as well. So yeah, I think we have discussed that per answer. So next question, contradiction. A team overall case has 2 prongs. If the second one is true, the first one's persuasiveness is compromised, vice versa. And therefore, the team's overall case greatly reduces in persuasiveness. The correct answers are the second and the fourth options. In this case, you would assess how much persuasion is compromised as a result of the statements being true. And according to the WDC manual, a judge should consider the first statement as the true one and disregard the second one. So the first answer is wrong because it seems to be reductive in approaching contradictions or tensions. Do not just say they contradict each other, making life easier for me to just flag it as contradiction, unpersuasive, fourth. That's not how you should evaluate it. The second answer is much more measured because a lot has to be taken into account, right? To what extent si kontradiksinya, apakah itu cuma salah ngomong doang, slip, atau sebenarnya nggak intentional juga? Apakah they meant something else, or they just ended up tripping? Was it pointed out by another team? It's very important as well to recognize that. And if you must pick between statements, ambil yang pertama. Kalau yang kedua kontradiktif, jangan di take into account, ambil yang pertama aja, especially kalau nggak di point out by the opponent. The fourth multiple choice question, next slide, please. Guilt. In the debate, di mana discussion about guilt is relevant, the following happened. OG said guilt is a potent feeling that internally destabilizes individuals, making them psychologically less able to be productive, after reasonably proving that guilt will arise as a consequence to some actions taken. OO response was to attack the likelihood that they argued individuals are far less likely to feel guilty because many factors such as their personal ideology, etc., etc. CG, a response was to break down numerous ways of guilt manifest, functioning this as a response to OO, and CO chose to run an extension about choice. They said, debate about guilt has been too saturated, deadlock in the other 3 teams, so nobody can prove anything about guilt, so choice is the most important thing in the debate. This is all that happened. So what is the possible and most likely justifiably correct conclusion to the debate? So in that case, on the first option, CO has successfully identified a deadlock, they should be credited, blah, blah, blah. No, evasion is not like a certain credit. The guilt debate that locks due to many good arguments against which CO still must respond is not, it's not just enough to say, this is not debate, this is the debate, we win. They have to explain why is that not a debate, why it's not that important, and why choice is severely more important. So it is called as framing, right? So you have to understand why certain thing being claimed is true. Do not just take them in face value. So you have to also assess them very carefully. Second option, CG has successfully extended OG's analysis on guilt and was the most successful in responding against OO. CG deserves some credit, right, in identifying additional ways which guilt manifests. But to classify it as successful extensions, a CG or you as a judge have to actively weigh why does it matter more. OG could have contributed to proving 60%, a lot of possibilities, right? So you cannot just say that just because they have more ways to explain how it will play out doesn't mean that they are actually more successful in proving that to be the case. Third option is a correct option because CO cannot just say that clash is too tight, difficult to abstract for me, so that's a different direction. That's not how a debate should be. You have to still engage no matter how difficult it is. That's why it's called debate. It's not called running away, right? So that's why then the third option is correct. Fourth, CO needs to, it's not a correct answer either because the extension is valid even as a POI to OG. Do remember though, an extension's validity does not automatically mean that it has higher value. Just because it's valid doesn't mean it is the most valuable or whatnot. Obviously, because they're already a false answer, the fifth option is incorrect. And the last option is difficult to decide. It kind of is difficult. So probably what's clear is CO's position in the debate. But even so, it's still up for discussion. So yeah, that would be it for this question. Hard work. In the motion, this House regard a narrative that hard work pays off. OO says that hard work is often motivating and people require the social push to succeed, resulting in mobility and development. CO says that this narrative is beneficial for women and minorities to achieve new heights and break the glass ceiling in various industries. All claims are well substantiated. Which of the following is true? So on the discussion part, vulnerable actor is not a priori a silver bullet just because people, hey, we identify the most vulnerable actor and therefore they're more specific and they should win. That's not how it is, because any teams bringing a vulnerable actor case, in this case a very, very niche benefit potentially, can win this, but it requires a certain framing as to why this is more valuable than a larger or more universal ones that OO already discussed. So in this case, it's not a correct answer just because you bring a very specific group of actor that is vulnerable. OO's tacit framing was to argue that their benefit is universally beneficial, right? Which naturally means that what CO argued for is already incorporated in what OO already talked about, which is an indirect conclusion that OO already mentioned. So that's why the second option is correct. Option 4 is incorrect because the reasonably well-proven idea should mean that you should suspend your disbelief and coach mode and assess the debate as it happened, not in terms of how you think it should be. So therefore, the fourth option is not exactly the correct answer, if not at all, because you have to see the debate as it is, and therefore it's not comparative. Job hopping. In the motion, this House regret a job hopping culture of young workers. OG runs the following setup. The likely culture that will exist in absence of job hopping is a culture where people build their own businesses instead, and where people can never job hop because technically it's their own business, so they cannot job hop, right? OG then argued that being locked in a certain businesses may be a worse culture, as it is not for everyone, and may have more economic risk. As a judge, very, very strictly, what would be the appropriate reaction? The only correct answer is it sounds like a reasonable counterfactual. Option 2 is definitely incorrect because a counterfactual is needed and required in regrets debate, as I have explained earlier. And second, the third option is trickier because the first part is correct by saying that what is the likely outcome, people having their own businesses. But the second part is the trick that we deliberately provided, because in this case, OG's limitation of counterfactuals is only heard full insofar as being proven by other teams. As long as they can prove why it's the likely scenario or the likely counterfactual, then that's enough. So the second part of the question is an argument, not necessarily a counterfactual. So therefore, in that case, you have to be very careful in separating the two and in identifying the two, because the argument may be a bad one or potentially a contradictive one even, but this question specifically addresses the counterfactual, not whether or not the argument is valuable or not. So that is the trick, and you have to be very careful because it may happen, and it has happened in a lot of debate rooms. So be very mindful in identifying counterfactual arguments, etc. I think that's the last question for multiple choice. So giving it up to Upi and later Judah to talk about the test debate results.
Hi, Judah, do you want to start with the first part?
I think you guys are available.
Okay. In that case, yeah, I could deal with this. Great. For the test debate, the consensus ranking, as you have already known, is that first went to OO, second went to CG, third went to OG, and fourth went to CO. The clear was the long cross, meaning OG and CO lost against OO and CG. OG taking it over quite decisively was, we thought, quite clear as well. So it's kind of iffy or difficult to kind of like CCO taking it over OG in that particular debate. Whereas in OO versus CG, it's very, very close within the CAP as well. And here's the reason for that. All right. Right, definitely. First, on general construct. First and foremost, for the CAP, it's rather difficult to see this debate with anything beyond short diagonal. Secondly, long diagonal ran cases on psychological betterment, but there's another clash in the debate, which is economics debate. So all of these things about how you feel after a certain family versus what you're going to get economically are two big clashes. But the long diagonals case on feeling better is not necessarily framed against economy. So it's kind of difficult to sort of weigh one thing over the other if the debaters don't do that for you. And that's why generally why the long diagonal lost. The government's bench, unfortunately, is also something that relies heavily on the mechanics of the counterfactual, absent in OG, and CG kind of dealt with this a little bit, but not enough to the degree that probably the benefits are not clear. More on that here, though. In opening government, there's a number of things that can support opening government's decision. What happened over there is that there's a point about privilege and historical lack of relevance, which is good because it's a great concept about elitism, social propaganda, and Cold War. Very smart, but probably not clear how that is relevant to Gen Z as an actor. So that's how we evaluated the argument. On social pressures, great and intuitive ideas about norms and gender imbalances, but probably sometimes lacking in depth to the degree that it was stolen by closing government. And sometimes, while successful in pointing out relative presence of bad norms, unfortunately, sometimes the idea about improvement in freedom requires a counterfactual to explain how this was achieved. That's why the social pressures in OG probably is slightly needing more explanation in terms of mechanics. On economy, some responses on OO's economic stability was there in DPM, but probably it's mostly assertive, and that means only assertion. So it could be explained a little bit further. And there's a truckloads of explanation in closing government. So probably more needs to be done in terms of economy. I think OG stopped at jobs are hard to find right now, but probably that could be explained a lot more. Now, the other parts about opening government's assessment was on setup. I think that that's one of the crucial issues in opening government. There was no counterfactual and there was no direct framing in terms of why a lot of their arguments talked about Gen Z, as this is a specific actor debate. That's the specific item that we want to test exactly with this motion, because it's both a regrets motion. Yes, because this is specifically a regrets debate and also an actor debate. So probably both need to be addressed by a team that wants to win this debate. So in summary, here's 4 things for opening government. OO won against opening government because a lot of economic stability was not responded. CG won against OG for developing more arguments and depth on economy. Same titles, but a lot more details that was meaningful. But most importantly, because CG framed all of their arguments in the actor motions context, as well as establishing the key requirement for regrets debate, which is a counterfactual. So these things were meaningful additions, not just some additions that is questionable in terms of meaning. Finally, opening government won against closing opposition is just not enough response from closing opposition, especially when it comes to why their extension is not only responsive to OG, but also why it's different with OG, because OG talked about why Gen Z feels a certain way about life. They don't like it. There's a lot of pressure. And CO talked about, oh yeah, Gen Z may not be all technologically savvy, but they're anxious, which is exactly what OG proved. So I don't know the difference in terms of that. That's why I think that a lot of the things that that CO mentioned is probably not responsive. Instead, 100% agreeing with OG to the degree that that concession proved fatal for CO. Now, on opening opposition, what they've contributed is on economy. There's a lot of points over here, such as multiple factors, worse economic outcomes, such as shackle to bad locales, mostly by DLO, and also some responses in OG just failed to deal with a lot of them. That's why maybe there's a lot of things established in economy, and probably they're the most dominating team in this debate when it comes to proving the mechanics of the economy. On the second point that OO proved is about harmful social pressures and norms. This is also very crucial to push back against opening government, which is the analysis that the counterfactual is problematic in terms of relieving from social pressures, more nagging, which is what a lot of judges pointing out in their OA, which is good. But there's more than that. Things like filial responsibility shackle people to smaller areas, and therefore in smaller family units, it's probably less filial responsibilities that is imposed. Relationships are often fragile at the LO, all of these things. Just take them into account. And there's some also other things that OO mentioned, like the mitigation of harms by, building a family is not always you trying it out and hoping it to be successful. There's phasing and process on that, even before 1940s America, which worked. So probably this has to be dealt with by the government side of the house as well. And finally, that crucial framing from DLO, which is to say, even when emotional woes happen, that's still as important than being able to economically sustain your job, or possibly if you're feeling sad, but you're rich, or you have economical stability, you're not going to feel that sad anymore. That frame was important because even though it's short, that has to be counter-responded as to why economy is less important than feelings, and that hasn't been done by no speakers in GovBench. So in summary, first and foremost, OO1, because of the multifactorial economic analysis, CG have responded a lot in OO's harms by mitigating them, but CG's lack of counterfactuals wasn't able to sort of show why their benefits manifest more than OO's. OO won against closing opposition because protection with economy is more tangible than protection by family affection. And finally, please allocate appropriate credit to leader of opposition, who may come across as stylistically less convincing, but there's a lot of good points there, and a lot of judges over-punish leader of opposition, and that I think is probably problematic, especially in NUDC. There's a lot of very novice speakers who may come across as not a very convincing speaker, but probably having a lot of good points. And we may miss it out if you kind of like say, oh, there's one style of good speaker, and if they don't adhere to that, then bye-bye. That's not good. Yeah. Also, please value OO's POI game, because they're great in handling POIs and asking really deadly POIs. So please incorporate that into your judging. Now, the next thing, okay, great. On closing government, one of the strongest things they contributed in the debate was responses on economy. OG have started some of these responses, but not enough, and they just added a lot more in terms of inflation, sharing fails when both parents are poor, all of those things. And OO, is contingent on people having assets in order for them to have like meaningful benefits and things like that. Stronger responses that adds more meaningfully. And therefore, if OO is going to be taken down by any team, probably the most direct and explicit attacks in CG, not in OG. But on emotional woes, OG also extended opening government by framing a lot of their emotional woe argument towards Gen Z. So that's really, really good. But also they deliberately identified counterfactuals like extended family, single parent household, communal parenting, as opposed to their OG, which is very meaningful for this debate, but also making the mechanics of how do you get the benefit of freeing people from social shackles a lot more reasonable, or a lot more easy to understand, and a lot more able to be seen as likely to manifest. And that's why that's really, really crucial as extensions. Unfortunately, some of the problems with CG, which we're going to accept if people sort of like docked CG down in the OA, was the fact that most are identified only in WIP these counterfactuals, it counts as what we call in worlds a whip tension, right? Because a whip contributed the bulk of the extension as opposed to the member. So that's a failure in the sense that there's very little response time by their opponent when it comes to this. And then the whip didn't take any POIs, which means O absolutely had no chance to respond against closing government's counterfactual, and that's unfair. And in closed debates, that can really cost them the VP. So please do take these into account. So in summary, CG wants against OG by answering the motions burden more deliberately and accurately and add more meaningful additions to the clarity of many of the clear arguments in debate. OO won against CG, despite CG's excellent responses, because OO's benefits manifest more and was mechanized a little bit more, because CG just bungled their counterfactual and forth. It's a great speech, but the counterfactual was not dealt with in a proper way. So probably positive case CG, if you're watching this, needs to be highlighted. CG won against CO, however, because she just pointed out that there is a lack of response from CO. There's a lack of meaningful difference between O and CO and all of those things. It is very important for judges, all of you, to assess debates, frames, and meta debate as also important besides content, because a lot of the judges who gave CG the win even did not take into account how CG mapped the debate and called out, this is what certain teams have done, this is what certain speakers have done, this is the relative positioning of certain teams based on our assessments. 90% of what they said in this debate was actually very, very good, very, very fair, and very, very adjudication-like. And you have to take these into account and incorporate them as part of your adjudication, not just pure matter or pure content, because that, again, is not holistic judging. Finally, on closing opposition, great extensions, great ideas, appreciated the recharacterization, but the recharacterization did not lead into anything that is different with anything that Prime Minister have established. The second thing on protection was that family love was wonderful, but the example, which is about families pressuring the kids of doctors to become doctors themselves, is the same kind of pressure that OG and CG was talking about, different sources, but same outcome. So probably there is a question of similarity and concessions over here, because it seems that the benefit that CO proposes is exactly the harm that OG and CG was talking about. So in that regard, there's that inextricability of those two things to the degree that it's logically weird to sort of like see CO proving that point the same way that OG and CG proves the exact same point, to the degree that the extension is then logically very problematic. That's why ultimately that protection point was not seen as relevant. But most importantly, there is also a lack of framing or weighing that CO did relative to the other teams. For instance, why did their point win over the opening debate? Why did their point respond directly to closing governments? Why was their point more important than the economy debate? All of those things. So just make more responses. I think that would be really crucial for closing opposition in this debate. It hurt them severely. There is a weak meta, as I mentioned before, and also the final nail in the coffin of closing opposition. It's just that there is no POI taken by both speakers. Like there's a lot of POI offers, and they're the last team to speak, so they have a lot of power in order to determine what the last word of the debate is. They decided not to be charitable to their opponents and shutting everybody down. Not a good look. And in Worlds, you're going to get severely punished if you do that. So as judges who are preparing Indonesians to go to Worlds, you also have to impart that expectation in the sense that please take a POI of one. You know what I mean? Like one per speaker is not a lot. So please do that. There's also a tendency for judges to do what's called the recency bias. Whatever you heard last is what's truest. That's a cognitive bias that happens to many human minds. Just be mindful of that bias and avoid that. That would be how the decisions fell about. I'm sorry it's a little bit scattered, but hopefully the gist still manifests, and feel free to ask further questions. Expected ranges of score as follows: PM 75 to 76, clear harms that could have used a lot more setup to link to Gen Z and some counterfactuals. DPM was 77 because social pressures and economic responses were good, but probably could use the same encouragement as PM in terms of linking the debate back to the motions requirements. Opening opposition, now this is where the problem really happens. LO 78 to 79, a lot of under punishing with the judges. DLO 82 to 83, clear flips and mechanics. Gov on member of Gov 78, great responses, but the positive case was really, really behind. So probably that is something that counterbalances the score. In WIP, the counterfactual game was strong, but operationalization low, but overall a great speech because a lot of the benefit become a lot more likely in that speech. And finally, member of opposition 73 and opposition WIP 73 and 74. Same thing, lots of strategic frames could be used, lots more direct responses, especially in placement of the extension relative to the other teams, and just take a POI. Now, general observations are as follows. There's some score problems. Many of the judges who got the ranking right were still stuck at the 74 to 79 range. These are numbers that are very suspiciously similar to Asians, but BP is not the same with Asians, so probably the numbers have to be sort of calibrated more properly. And often judges don't give, substantial margins, which is not okay, especially when the results are quite clear. Okay, so please give appropriate margins. Clear is fine. And sometimes in NUDC, there's big gap teams, so more margins between speakers are fine. There's stylistic biases as well in the judges, LO too heavily underpunished, and government whip, interestingly, was severely underscored. There's some things that I want to talk about later on, but stylistic biases need to be dealt with. Another thing that is concerning is narrow judging. Everyone assessed only the content, but not taking into account teams' efforts in assessing motion relevance, comparison between teams, BP rules such as POI influence, etc. So expand a little bit. Holistic judging means more than just simply content. And finally, vertical extensions. Many judges punish the closing team, particularly CG, for having similar material with opening. But remember, newness can be many, many meanings. And on the flip side, don't overvalue closing teams as well, because recency bias that I just mentioned, all of those things. Now, finally, I just want to share a number of statistics. I mean, I think this year's statistics is quite interesting, although not as interesting as last year, but still really meaningful. In terms of what the results are, most IAs got the 4th correct, so that's really, really good. Most judges over-glorified CG a little bit. I mean, winning against opening opposition closely, we can still understand, but winning absolutely over opening opposition is just like, it's a little bit weird. That's why probably that needs to be revisited. And finally, opening opposition, I think, is a very tricky team in the debate because one speaker was severely over-punished. So just make sure you listen a little bit more and track the debate better, take notes, all of those things, and not necessarily just like, I feel the speaker is not like President Sukarno, who speaks in a fiery way, and therefore that speaker is not convincing. That's going to be problematic. The most conflicting results in this debate is based on your submissions is OO versus CG and OG. As you can see from here, the ranking pairs are mostly red in those two comparisons. In terms of opening speaker scores, I don't want to discuss about the other 3 speakers except the LO, because possibly the underscoring is due to style. Yet style shouldn't matter in holistic judging, is chosen as false mostly by many, many judges. Please do take into account that LO contributed with argument clarity, wording precision, and exactitude. All of these things should matter in assessing argument value too, not just mere length, how many sentences speakers say within a certain argument. Choosing the right words that expresses the exact tone of the argument is also something very, very meaningful, because especially in worlds, this is going to get a lot of appreciation from many judges as well. So please do take these into account. On DLO, just a really quick score. DLO, everyone generally scores DLO correctly, but above 83 is fine as well. It doesn't have to be, because that person is not, the very famous guy from Undip who has ruled NUDC for many, many years, and therefore nobody can go for that person. You can go over 83. That's very likely. Finally, on closing speaker scores, I want to talk about 3 speakers. The first is on member of opposition and opposition whip. Way over credited, unfortunately. There is a concern in that speakers who are simpler in their approach is credited more by the judges, interestingly, which prevents speakers from exploring more complex or elevated cases. Please don't do this, because again, NUDC is not the end. NUDC is a pathway for people to go to worlds. And in worlds, people have to develop more complex arguments with more complex English nuances and things like that. So please do take into account complexity and make sure you're not punishing people for being too complex. Like, I just don't understand them, and therefore maybe I'm just going to score them okay, 75. That's not okay, because then that means we're punishing great, excellent, experimental, and elevated speakers, and we're valuing mediocre cases. Because this is what happened with government whip. Because strangely, infuriatingly, and universally, government whip is underscored by everybody because of this statistic, which is crazy, because there's a lot of debate techniques in meta, plus a lot of addition on content like counterfactuals, like some addition to the social woe, on pressures and emotional woes argument that she contributed. So that was weird in terms of why this speaker was particularly underscored. Like, I just want to note that there is, beyond some missing out on the elevated level and quality of English that probably makes it difficult for a lot of judges to sort of relate with government whip speech, which is not something that a judge should do. You should try to, as much as possible, understand even speakers who speak fast and with complex ideas and with elevated English. Just go for it, take a lot of notes, but also take into account that there is a gender or tone bias that is experienced by a lot of Asian NCMs, and that means non-cis male, even in Asia. Yeah, because it's just that there are a lot of Asian NCMs that speaks with a different way. It's not oratorical, it's not Sukarno, it's not some of the more famous sort of public speaking experts that we have in Indonesia, not Mario Teguh, you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean that if you don't speak a certain way, you're not a good speaker. It's just different, right? So please do take biases into account and make sure we're not punishing people who do not speak in the style that we expect. There is not just one way of being a good debater. There's not just good one way to become an NUDC winner or a world's sort of contender, okay? Just make sure it's not necessarily wonky on your end. That is it. I'm so sorry for taking a lot of time. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have requisite time for question and answer right now, or do we? Oh, we have 30 minutes. Okay, we have 13 minutes. I think we can take 2-3 questions to start. So feel free to do that. I mean, if we have more time to answer, we can. If not, WhatsApp group. Thank you, guys. Any questions, thoughts? Feelings must be a lot. All right, in that case, I believe that we can wrap up. Thank you so much for your attention. I know that it has been long, but hopefully this is helpful for NUDC. We wish you the very best of luck. CAP signing out for today. See you guys tomorrow. Have a good night rest before the tournament. Well done, everybody. And yeah, have a great evening. Bye.